Will the King stop Prince Harry joining the Order of the Garter? Is Prince George receiving lessons on being the King already? And what really goes on behind the scenes on royal tours? Today, we're answering your questions. Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Palace Confidential. I'm Jo Elvin, and answering some of your questions on our panel today are two of my favourite ever Christmas crackers. We've got the Daily Mail's royal editor Rebecca English and the paper's diary editor Richard Eden. Welcome to you both. Looking very resplendent in your Christmas finery.
Well, so I'd say the same for you, Jo, as well.
Oh, shucks. Well, a reminder that before we begin, please do subscribe to the Daily Mail Royals channel if you don't already. Just click the subscribe button. It's free and you will never miss our brilliant royal content ever again. What a promise for you there. Now, as I said before, it's a show with a bit of a difference in that the questions come from you, our wonderful viewers. You've sent us a lot, so many things that you want to know, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can. And you know me, I may throw a few follow-up questions in there as well. So we're going to start today with Eileen Seacrest. Now, she has a question. Could you explain how royal residences work? Gosh, we're going to be here a long time on this one already. I understand most of the homes are part of the Crown's holdings, but I also heard that Prince Andrew sold a home gifted to him by the Queen. I think the word gifted, such as used to describe Frogmore, which was gifted to Harry and Meghan, is confusing since the home was taken back. I'm confused already. What does happen to the homes once the lease runs out, and what about the homes where Princess Anne and Prince Edward live? Are they theirs to keep or sell, and what happens to them later? Oh my goodness. Thank you for clearing this up. Rebecca, go.
What a Christmas present.
That's not one question there, actually. That's quite a few.
I think, look, this is a tricky one to answer in a short time space. I think we should do a whole programme. So there are some private homes the members of the royal family owns, Gatcombe Park being one of them. That was literally bought by Queen Elizabeth for her daughter as a wedding present. You've got Balmoral, Birkhall, Sandringham, again bought by various members of the royal family over the years. So they're theirs to sell if they so chose. The rest of the properties that we think of, Frogmore, Royal Lodge, places like that, are all part of what's called the Crown Estate. And that's actually an independent body, independent of the monarchy, independent of the British government, that look after the properties that have been historically held by sovereigns. So members of the royal family can't sell these properties and they can't realise any assets out of them. So when we say something's gifted, it's because a lot of these properties are within kind of security cordons. So actually really only members of the royal family can live in them. So the Queen might, or the King now, might have said, look, I would love Andrew to have this home. And he would negotiate a lease with the Crown Estate to live in it.
Right.
Now, of course, they're meant to be negotiated at a commercially acceptable rate. What we'll never find out about that. What do you class as, a commercially advantageous rate? I don't know. There are a lot of smoke and mirrors there, unfortunately.
Wow. And Richard, they do still like to keep quite a few things secret from us. It's a weird, we were talking about this earlier, it's a weird blurred line for me where it's, private funds, public property, Crown property, where it's all a bit of a blur, isn't it?
Yes, it's complicated in the sense that some of the royal finances are public that we have because it's the sovereign grant which comes from a portion of the profits of the Crown Estate. But then the royal family also have what they call private money, which comes from the Duchy of Lancaster, which is basically a collection of properties in different places in the country. That gave the King, it goes directly to the King, and it gave him, I think, about £24 million this year.
Nice.
And, yes, and he can do whatever he likes with that money, and he doesn't have to account for it publicly. So that's where, and that's I should say that's a historic thing. These were properties that they've acquired over the years, and they've remained. And I have to say also, politicians have quite liked it because it's meant that they haven't had to give the royal family lots of money because they already have a sort of private income. So, for example, the Queen would use that money to look after various members of her family, perhaps someone who is retired, doesn't carry out duties anymore, but she still wants to look after. And there's a lot of freedom there. So,
right.
King Charles could use that money to look after Prince Andrew if he wanted, or he might not.
He might not.
It's entirely up to him.
He might not. I think we've got a slightly easier question, I think, here, but we are sticking with royal residences for a moment. Now, Ali asks, when the royal family gather at Sandringham for Christmas, do they all stay at the main castle, or are they dispersed to various guest houses? Ali says she's just picturing in her mind all the little ones opening their presents and how much fun it must be. Love from South Carolina. Thank you.
Yes, we sort of addressed some of this in our Christmas special of Reading the Royals.
Nice plug there, Richard. We'll get another one in a minute. Yeah.
Sandringham is one of those private estates. It's huge. I mean, there are I think there's about 700 homes in total on the estate. It's massive. But in Sandringham House itself, because it's a private residence, we don't know exactly how many bedrooms there are, for example. There are thought to be about 30, but that means, yes, there'll be a lot of members of the royal family staying there this Christmas, and it does mean it's great fun. I mean, you've got that huge extended family and, you know, opening presents together and things like that.
Well, I was just going to add to that. I've been told kind of in the past that Sandringham can fit about 16 to 18 people to have a sleepover.
Oh, okay, that's quite small.
Comfortably. In fact, in previous years, I've been told that they've actually had to kick staff out of their quarters, and Edward and Sophie were put in some of the staff quarters because they literally had nowhere else to stay. And it sounds more glamorous than it is. I mean, someone described the...
Would you rather have Edward and Sophie there or the staff to help you, like, still get your cups of tea and drinks?
Well, someone described it to me. They said the beds are like these, what they call fish finger beds, that they're literally kind of like that, in these really old-fashioned beds with the kind of creaky kind of bed springs at the bottom. It's not quite as glamorous as it cut out, but as Richard rightly says, they do have other properties. So Wood Farm, for example, that the late Duke of Edinburgh lived in at the latter years of his life. The Yorks now get that to stay at Christmas. So, you know, they take, because they've got obviously children, grandchildren now, so, you know, they're given that to use. So, you know, they squeeze in. But it's a bit of kind of what they call family Jenga at Christmas.
Now, obviously, with the royal family and royalists, Harry's memoir Spare wasn't the most popular tomb ever, but he did paint an interesting picture of, you know, what these gatherings are like at royal residences, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I think he made them sound a bit sad sometimes. You know, everyone doing the same old Christmas traditions, you know, listening to the monarch's speech, playing charades, all that lot. But actually, I think it sounds quite nice. They have
wholesome,
some kind
I think
of
it sounds.
genuine family fun.
Yeah.
Be interesting to see what Christmas is like this year, I have to say.
It's going to be rollicking, isn't it? Like a lot of people there. We discussed yesterday. Well, here's a question from Fred Porlock, who asks, as an American Anglophile, I've always enjoyed listening to the late Queen's and current King's Christmas message. Since this Windsor tradition began, has there been a year where the speech was considered most controversial? Love from Princeton, Indiana, USA. That's a good question. Any controversial ones come to mind, Rebecca?
I was having a think about this, and I can't think of anyone that's been particularly controversial, because obviously the monarch is head of state and they're non-partisan, so the whole point is they try not to be controversial. But they do get a bit more free rein with the annual Christmas message, and there's a lot of subliminal messaging in it. So the most recent one I could think of was 2019, when Queen Elizabeth referred to what a difficult year it had been for everyone, and obviously that was seen as a very clear reference to the very difficult debate we had in this country over Brexit and Britain leaving the EU. And of course that speech inadvertently became, in a funny way, controversial within the family, because we later found out from Prince Harry and people briefing publications that he was particularly unhappy because he thought his and Meghan's photograph would feature in the family photo frames on her desk, where there is a lot of messaging in it, and it wasn't, and he thought that they'd been erased out of the picture. So I suppose there's some kind of maybe some slightly accidental controversy.
So tell us a bit more about how you as a journalist find out about the speech every year.
Well, out of all the kind of closely guarded secrets in the royal world, the Christmas speech is the most closely guarded secret.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, one year it got leaked to The Sun, and I mean, gives new definition to the word mole hunt. They were very angry about this because it's a personally penned speech by the monarch. It's not written by advisors and private secretaries necessarily. It's their message to their people. So we only get to find out about it very late. Some years we might get a suggestion of what the theme is going to be, but actually even that's been quite closely guarded. So on Christmas Day, which I normally have to work for this reason, I will get an advance of it a couple of hours before, because obviously journalists and broadcasters, we have to go live with it pretty quickly as it's happening at 3 o'clock. But it really is quite up to the wire that we get it.
So no sort of like cheeky champagne tipples for you before that speech comes out?
Oh, I mean, no. I mean, I know it's been filmed, and I know there's going to be something a little bit interesting about it this year. I can't really say any more than that.
Oh,
but
she always teases us, doesn't she?
I think it'd be good,
yeah.
but it's well, I think it is. But the actual substance of the speech, absolutely not.
It's fascinating. Well, anyway, you might have noticed this glorious spread we have here. This has been sent from our friends at Highgrove, don't you know? And for those who don't know, Highgrove is one of the private residences of King Charles and Queen Camilla in Gloucestershire in England. They have an online shop and it sells all of the goodies fit for a king or queen, with all funds going to charity, some of which you can see here. We'll put a link to that in the description below. Thank you so much to Highgrove. Now, speaking of decorations, let's go to what sounds like a trick question from Patricia Miller, who asks, how many Christmas trees are put up in Buckingham Castle, Buckingham Palace, I think she means. Do the royals put any lights outside of their homes for the holidays? Rebecca, do you know the answer? Is there any sort of like the Griswolds at Christmas going on with any of the royal families?
Well, I've been in and out a lot recently, but I have to say I haven't counted. So I'm slightly flummoxed by this question. But what I can say is I was in Buckingham Palace the other day and they had a huge Christmas tree up in the grand entrance, so I know I saw one there. And then I was at Clarence House for this lovely event that Queen Camilla holds every year, where she brings in seriously and terminally ill children in to decorate the Christmas tree. And I saw two there. There was one up in the hallway and there was the one in the library that the children decorated. So I know they've got three.
Okay.
And obviously they'll have one in their own private homes as well. But the funny thing is about going into the palaces at this time of year is that they can feel quite empty, because of course once things start winding down and you kind of walk through and you feel like you're the only person in the place. So the Christmas decorations can feel a bit kind of eerie sometimes.
I think the technical answer, Patricia, is lots of Christmas trees. Is that good enough?
I think that's the best I can do, Jo.
Let's move on to a question from Andrea Massey, who asks, I would love to learn more about royal holiday traditions now and historically. Richard, anything to share there?
Well, certainly it's very interesting, the history of Christmas traditions for the royal family, because a lot of the traditions that we have in Britain now come from Prince Albert. It was the German influence, that having a Christmas tree. No one did that really before him. He popularised that, and lots of the emphasis on the celebrations of Christmas came from him. And the royal family have kept up the Germanic traditions from the German heritage. And so, for example, whereas most British people open their presents on Christmas morning, in the royal family they exchange the gifts on Christmas Eve. We've mentioned how many people are at Sandringham, so you can imagine the trestle tables.
That's going to go on till 3 in the morning.
Yeah, it starts with most senior, presents for the king and queen, and then they work down, so you go and sort of find your pile. And they have a tradition of being joke gifts, because obviously, one of the wealthiest families in Britain, they don't particularly need socks or whatever. So there's various joke gifts, whoopee cushions or...
Great. So sophisticated.
Things. What was it? I think Catherine bought for Harry, her future brother-in-law. She bought him a Grow Your Own Girlfriend kit.
Right.
So it's that sort of thing. So at least it means there are lots of laughs on Christmas Eve.
I think that Catherine probably thinks that he didn't really follow the instructions on that to the letter. Oh dear. But apparently, you mentioned earlier they love they love a game, don't they? They like sort of like charades and things like that.
They genuinely play charades on Christmas Day.
Charades to us.
Charades. Oh, sorry, it's my Australian girl. Charades.
Charades. And not while the Christmas speech is being given. They all stand and watch the speech.
Well, you wouldn't dare
traditionally
not.
Queen Elizabeth
Yeah.
exited the room while that happened. And I presume King Charles still does the same. I haven't specifically asked anyone because it's kind of probably a bit slightly embarrassing standing there watching oneself being watched by the family. But they do, and it's, you know, I think sometimes we don't think of them as being particularly close, but actually they are. There's a lot of kind of WhatsApp groups apparently between different family members, especially for the younger ones. It's a chance to really get together and enjoy kind of time with each other.
Yeah, I think all the cousins generally seem to tick along very nicely, don't they?
Most of them.
Yeah, most of them. Yeah, I'm being positive. Positive. Jacqueline Vaughan has a question. First of all, she says, loving Rebecca's hair lately, aren't we all? Delightful, gorgeous. Jacqueline's question, what's it like to travel on a royal tour? Do you get to enjoy the places you visit? Rebecca, what do you and your hair get up to on a royal tour?
Well, I don't think Jacqueline would say that about my hair if she could see me on the recent tour of Australia and Samoa, where literally wherever we went is everywhere it rains, and it's either rain or humid and rushing between about 10 engagements
I can only
a day.
apologise on behalf of my country. Yeah.
I mean, you'd probably expect me to say this, but we do work really hard on these trips. I mean, Australia, we were working 20-hour days. I mean, the last day in Samoa, I literally had 1 hour's sleep when we were working. And it's often a lot of kind of hotel rooms and airports, but I'm not going to do a kind of woe is me piece because we do get to see some incredible countries, even just brief glimpse of them. And I think one of the standout ones for me has been Bhutan, with the Prince and Princess of Wales, or, you know, Duke and Duchess of Cambridge as they were then, because it's a very unusual country to visit. It's quite difficult to get there as a tourist.
Yes, you probably wouldn't have in any other
They're
walk.
quite strict on visas, and,
Yeah.
and even to fly in, it's so difficult to get through the mountains. You have to go on a plane with a special pilot. And I actually remember on that trip, William, obviously being a pilot himself, and he was allowed in the cockpit to see it. And he came back down the plane when we landed and said, you know, how's everyone's pants? Because that was pretty hairy,
Wow.
wasn't it? And he said he was watching it almost through his fingers. And it's just
It's the kind of thing you're glad you hear afterwards. Yeah.
you know, so we do get to visit some very special places. And I've been to inside palaces that, you know, when I was a student, I stood outside looking through the railings, you know, when I was backpacking. So, you know, we are very lucky. We get to see some places that are very special, but, you know, we're not sitting there on a sun lounger with a cocktail, unfortunately.
Still an incredible job.
Oh,
though.
I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky.
And we're very glad that you do it. Swan Girl 853 says, I love Rebecca and Richard. They're all right. Do William and Catherine know who they are? And do they ever get acknowledged? In brackets, doesn't William loathe the media like Harry? Rebecca, they know who you are, don't they? Do they love you? Do they loathe you? Somewhere in the middle?
I don't know what they think about me. I've never asked them. Yeah, I mean, you know, the question, no, of course they know who I am, and I talk to them. But you're there in a professional capacity. You're not there as a friend. William definitely has a very complex relationship with the media because of his childhood, because of his mother. And I've always completely understood that. And he's very careful that he wants to ring fence his family in a way that he feels he wasn't ring fenced when he was growing up. And they're quite professional. They keep quite a professional distance when they're on jobs. You know, they won't arrive and say good morning and talk to you like other members of the royal family. They're very focused on the people that they're meeting. But, you know, if we're away on a royal tour, things are slightly more relaxed, and you'll, you know, maybe have a chat on the plane going out or on the way back, or have a quick drink and kind of, you know, reminisce about the kind of, you know, the funny or the more crazy moments when you're on a royal trip. And William's actually surprisingly kind of candid and quite open about things that, you know, he did wrong and no one realised. So he's got quite a good sense of humour about things like that.
Richard, I'll ask you the second part of that question. Is like William's relationship with the media, from your point of view, what is it like?
Well, I think, and what's interesting is how it has changed, you know, and he has essentially, even though like his brother Prince Harry, he's never liked the media, you know, he's sort of, there's a grudge there because of what happened with Princess Diana. But Prince William's been very mature about it and has accepted for a constitutional monarchy to thrive. People need to know what they're doing.
Yeah.
You know, you need the media and you need to respond to it. And so he's been very grown up about it, and yes, he might not love the media, and perhaps behind the scenes he's cursing us, but he gets on with it and does it in a professional way.
I also wonder if in more recent times, with the advent of social media, and we've seen how Catherine was really sort of like run through the mill with her cancer diagnosis. I wonder if it gives somebody like William pause for a bit more respect for mainstream media.
I don't know about respect, but I know I think there's a realisation that the classic media are not necessarily the enemy, because actually we have very strict rules.
Yeah.
I've said this on the programme, governing what we can say or what things we can publish. And there is, especially when it comes to children, that their right to a private life is actually enshrined in rules and regulations. And social media has opened that up. There's a lot of citizen journalists and people snapping pictures on their mobile phones when they're on private family outings that we would never publish, but are seen all over social media.
Yeah.
So it's added quite a complex dimension from them about how we handle it. And you're absolutely right. This year we have seen the worst excesses of it, and I know that has really upset them as a couple.
Indeed. Well, now sticking with William, A.E. Gronewald asks, what do you guys think about Prince William not having an investiture for the Prince of Wales title like his father? I feel like I don't even have to ask you, Richard, what you think about this.
Well, it is.
Here he goes.
It's a really important subject, because for Prince Charles it was a big deal. It was a big event.
With an added ping pong ball on the crown.
Yes, and we talked about how they created the crown.
Yeah.
Even using a ping pong ball on top. But it was a huge event. He was a young man at the time, and Prince William chose not to have one at all. So that was a big decision, actually, and not as much has been made of it, perhaps, as as you might think. And it's significant because it's William wanting to sort of get on with a job and not have the big ceremony, and it does make you wonder about a coronation. Will he want the huge coronation that we had with for King Charles? It's kind of part of the job, but it's up to him what he wants to do.
It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, and it's basically such a different time to what was like the late 60s, early 70s. What do you think William's head is?
It was the 60s, and I have to say I don't blame him for not having a coronation. I do think, or an investiture.
Yeah.
I think we are operating in very different times, and I know from their point of view is that they feel, as Prince and Princess of Wales, they don't really need to state it in the way that it was done previously, that they can show their commitment to the people of Wales by word and deed rather than kind of grand ceremony. And I think Richard's right, that's something that rings through a lot of the way William is starting to conduct his public duties. But I know his commitment there is just as great.
This sort of like this more toned down approach, it's not really going to satisfy, people like viewers of this show. The royal family is such an international spectacle because of pomp and ceremony, isn't it? So it's a fine line to draw. Yeah,
well, I would say being Prince of Wales is a big deal, and Prince Charles took it very seriously. He went to study Welsh at a Welsh university and that sort of thing. And so if you get rid of the ceremony and the pomp and circumstance that go with it, then you can sort of argue, well, what's the point?
Indeed.
And,
it's interesting.
I would say that's part of the appeal of the monarchy, is the ceremony and everything that goes with it.
Right, well, from the heir to his heir now, and Lisa has this question. Do you think George is being tutored by King Charles the way Queen Elizabeth started teaching William early in his life? That's an interesting question. Rebecca, is this happening or is it just a bit too soon?
I think it's a really good question, actually. Look, there's no doubt that Charles has a good relationship with his grandchildren, and we've seen glimpses of that. Do you remember at Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee celebrations, there was some lovely footage of William saying to his father, do you want to hold Louis for a bit? You know, he's getting a bit ants in his pants, and it's very sweet stuff of him bouncing on his knee. So he does have a good relationship, but I think William's relationship with Queen Elizabeth was really unique. I mean, obviously, he was at Eton. When he was at Eton, he's just kind of go out of school and walk across the bridge and go and have tea with his grandmother. I think they had a really, really special relationship. And I think William has, as we said, very definite ideas about how he wants to do things. I know as well that him and Catherine have really thought long and hard about how they introduced George to this whole idea of being king one day. I mean, you know, as a child, how do you get your head around that? And how also do you stop your child from, I suppose, getting a bit big-headed? You know, if you go into school one day and you say, oh, I'm going to be, you know, as children will do, I'm going to be in charge of all this one day. I'm not saying George would do that, but I'm saying, you know, it's an introduction. I know there was a period of time where they hadn't told him, and George was kind of coming home from school and kind of asking questions that clearly other children had said things to him, and they were like, okay, we need to have a think about how we gently introduce this topic to him. So I think it's something they're doing, and they're doing, actually, I think, very well. You know, we've spoken often on this programme how much of a credit those children are to them. And I think, you know, I think they're handling it well in their own way.
What a surreal, you know, most of us have to, the chat means something about facts of life for most of us parents, doesn't it? There's a completely different thing in their household. Yeah,
exactly. It's a lot for a little mind to take on, I think.
It really is. Well, staying with the royal grandchildren, I should say, and chiming in asks, will Prince Archie's children be a prince or princess? I'm pretty sure Lilibet's children won't be. Thanks and love your show. Well, thank you. Richard, what do you think?
No, they won't. So essentially, the grandchildren of the monarch can be prince and princess. And remember that it was brief that Harry and Meghan wouldn't use titles for their children after the birth.
I do remember that.
But then they underwent a radical change of mind and insisted they were going to be using these titles. So we have an American prince, American princess. But their children won't, because they will be the niece and nephew of our monarch, but not grandchildren. So.
Well, I mean, it's like a lot of old English families, Rebecca. It's, you know, the first child takes precedence. Is there any way, as a royal, that Archie will be marked out different in status to Lilibet?
Well, they could do by issuing something that's called letters patent, which is exactly what Richard was saying. All this boils down to the 1917 letters patent issued by King George V, which is basically an expression of the monarch's wishes. And he made clear that he wanted either his children, the sons of his children, or the eldest living son of the Prince of Wales to be HRHs. Queen Elizabeth adapted that to kind of take account that we're in a much more modern era, so basically allow the girls to have a say, and that meant that if William and Catherine's firstborn child had been a girl, they would have been heir to the throne. But traditionally, yes, in this country, it's what we call primogeniture, so it goes with the male line. The royal family have adapted to that. And I know, sorry to kind of go on about it, but I know certainly from the palace, that was an immense moment of frustration for them. The suggestion by Meghan when she did Oprah is that Archie was being treated differently from his cousins. And she suggested, without saying it implicitly, but that was because he was a child of a biracial marriage. And I know this really upset and angered a lot of people, because they said, look, we have explained this to her many times, and she is a smart lady, and we don't understand why she doesn't understand this, that these are the rules, that Archie is not a prince now while Queen Elizabeth is on the throne, but when King Charles is, he will become a prince, and it's their choice as to whether they want to use those HRH titles. So.
Well, it won't surprise you to know we've had a lot of questions about titles, and we're staying with them for Matthew Allen's question, who asks, we all love Princess Anne and admire her remarkable work ethic here. However, with regards to her title, will Princess Anne confer the title of Princess Royal to Princess Charlotte? They also add, thank you for providing the best and most informative update on the royal family. You make me feel very proud to be a monarchist. Oh, that's nice, isn't it? Thank you. Richard, what can you tell us about this Princess Royal title?
Yes, it's a very interesting question. It won't be one for Princess Anne to confer.
Well, that was my first question. Yeah. Is it up to her? Yeah.
So, no, even though she is the Princess Royal, it won't be up to her. So it's up to the monarch. And traditionally, the Princess Royal would be the eldest daughter of the monarch. So when Prince William eventually becomes king, it is likely that Princess Charlotte, if Princess Anne is dead by that point, then Princess Charlotte may be our future Princess Royal, which would be something to look forward to.
And is it one of those things where you never know, Princess Charlotte might turn around and say she doesn't want that title? Is that an option?
Yeah, she could do. Who knows? Who knows what the future holds? But that's been the tradition in the past anyway, that it's the eldest daughter of the monarch.
Thank you very much. Well, a reminder that all these questions come from you, our wonderful viewers. So let us know any more you have in the comments below. And if we get enough, maybe we'll do another special show answering your questions again, and you'll have to do your homework. Not that you don't know it anyway, but anyway. Well, here's a good question from our dragon. Does any of the panel disagree with me in that Prince Harry may be the first and only child of the sovereign to not be given or awarded the Order of the Garter? Taking away all the things he has done since leaving, e.g. the Oprah interview, does any of the panel think Prince Harry will ever receive the Order of the Garter or any honour with a sash, example, an upgrade from KCVO to GCVO during his lifetime? That's a very technical question. It's a very interesting point, isn't it, Rebecca?
But I think it's quite a simple answer. I agree. I think it's very unlikely.
Job done.
And I think it's worth explaining what the Order of the Garter is all about. It's the highest order of chivalry in the country, and is given not by any government or any official. It's personally given by the monarch for exceptional and loyal service to the crown. And I think you're probably going to be able to predict what I'm going to say here is that I think in recent years Harry has not proved that he is a loyal servant of the crown, and I think it's
hard to argue with that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if he ever came back as a working royal, but I think we all know that is incredibly unlikely to happen.
I mean, do you think that, given we've already discussed today Prince William's discomfort with all sort of pomp and pageantry and the dressing up, do you think that even something like the Order of the Garter will just become less important anyway?
I really hope not, just because it's such fun. We always talk about the velvet, the feathers, the robes, and it just gives Princess of Wales such a laugh when she sees William and his finery. So
and that's reason enough.
So I strongly hope that his advisors, when he becomes king, says, no, we insist. If you want to be king, you want to be our head of state, you must get that velvet gown on. So
and that big plume in your hat.
Yeah, exactly.
Get it on right now. Well, here's a tricky question from Linda Ball, who asks, Rebecca is fab. I love how diplomatic, knowledgeable and respectful she is when talking about the royals. Is Linda your mum, Rebecca? The question though, Rebecca, who was your favourite royal and why?
Well, I'd probably have to be diplomatic and sound like Bruce Forsyth, who's a famous old British entertainer who says to the contestants on his show, "You're all my favourites." I think, look, it's no secret I've got on pretty well with Queen Camilla over the years, and that genuinely is because I had no preconceptions when I did this job. I'm the kind of person I really see as I find, and I'd only known about her I think what you guys would have known, our viewers would have known, and I learned that from documentaries on TV, newspaper articles, books, and none of it at the time was particularly complimentary, but I found her to be very kind of warm and funny and witty. I like the fact at a royal function where you'll see someone walking after them with a tray with a glass of water. Hers has a glass of wine on it. So she's slightly a woman after my own heart, I think. So I like it, but actually they've all surprised me by being far from grand and incredibly nice people to deal with.
Lovely. Now, Richard, I know Linda didn't ask for your favourite royal, but I'm going to ask, because I think a lot of people want to know that answer from you as well.
I think I would say our current Princess of Wales, just because she's come from a middle-class background. She wasn't born to it at all, but she's become, the real sort of heart of the royal family. And that's without putting a foot wrong at all. Despite everything she's gone through in the past year, which would test, any of us, but she's really shown that she's, I would say, just as regal or, if not more than some other members of the family, despite coming from a different background.
There you have it. Well, to a question about royal protocol now. Kalki asks, I noticed the Emir of Qatar walked in front of the king when reviewing the guard during the state visit. Such a big deal was made of then President Trump walking in front of Queen Elizabeth when doing the same. That's true. What is the usual or correct protocol at this event? And an early Merry Christmas from southern Louisiana. Rebecca, that moment with President Trump was talked about a lot, wasn't it? So what did you make of it?
That's not unfair question, I think, from our viewer. I was there at Horse Guards, and the king basically invited the Emir because they were looking at the Guard of Honour. So the king almost kind of gestured, come forward and have a look at it, and almost slightly hung back until they went up and down the different rows. And I think the trouble with the whole kind of issue with the Queen and the Donald Trump issue is I'm not a great believer in this idea of breaking protocol, because I think protocol is as protocol does. But I think what was a bit awkward about that moment was his actual nervousness, and he didn't really know what to do, and he was kind of stopping and starting and slightly moving in the way and then out, so it all just looked a bit awkward. But I can tell you, out of all the people that were offended about this, the one person that wasn't offended was the Queen, and I've spoken to people really close to her about it. And I think it's one of those cases often that the people around the principal get more het up about these things than the principal does themselves, and she actually really enjoyed their meeting.
And I think as a monarch, you would be used to people being nervous and frightened to put a foot wrong. And as Rebecca says, protocol is protocol, but Richard, things evolve as well, don't they?
They do, yes. I mean, it's kind of basic courtesy that you sort of stand behind the boss kind of thing. And the master of that was Prince Philip, his whole life, who would be, 2 steps behind the Queen.
Although if you believe the Crown, he wasn't very happy about it. Yeah.
No, but always letting her go first. But then when you've got 2 heads of state, as you did with the Emir of Qatar or Donald Trump, then it becomes slightly more confusing. I think generally you would let the head of state of the country you're in go first. I think that would be the standard protocol. But yes, protocols change, but I think that's quite a standard one that you would expect to keep in any country.
Well, I'll keep that in mind next time I'm standing anywhere near King Charles, or if I ever am indeed. Now, Pat Aya has a question. How does one become a royal reporter or part of the rota? Does one just step in with good writing and investigatory skills, knowledge of history and protocol? Well, it just so happens that we have somebody here who's very knowledgeable about the royal rota. What can you tell us, Rebecca?
I think the most important thing about being a royal correspondent is not actually having an ambition to be one. and hear me out. I mean, I was a general news reporter before I started doing this many moons ago. I literally was covering a really horrific murder trial in London at the start of the week, and was asked to start covering the royal family by the end of the week. And I was a little bit nervous about that because I don't come from that sort of background, and I was like, how am I going to do that? But I think that's why it's good, because you can look at it with a fresh eye. I've had to do a lot of reading of books, and you also learn on the job as well. And I think it's important not to run before you can walk. You don't make pronouncements that you know about these issues until you've really truly experienced them at the cutting edge of your job. And the royal rota is quite simple. The royal family need to be seen to be doing the job that they're publicly funded for, and that's a very, very important part of the checks and balances of monarchy. And basically all of the British newspapers and broadcasters and photographers basically get a turn to do engagements with them every week. And contrary to kind of popular opinion, is we don't have pressure put on us to write what the palace wants us to write, particularly on these engagements. We write what we see, and I've had some pretty testy conversations with palace officials about some of the reporting, because there are sometimes stories they would prefer you not to cover, but it's really important that we do so independently and without fear or favour.
How long have you been doing this now?
It's going to be at least 20 years.
It's amazing. And yeah, it's amazing.
And I still learn something new every week. So, it's a job, I think, that the kind of in-job training never ends.
It's a great job. Well, Geneva White asks now, was Queen Camilla a smoker? That's a left field one. Richard, Was she? Is she?
Yes, she was for many years.
Right.
But as her son, Tom Parker Bowles, made clear quite recently, she has given up. So you often see her portrayed, in dramas and stuff as, sort of chain smoking, knocking back the booze. But no, she's given up the evil weed.
Oh, that's good.
I think the suggestion was maybe like 15 years ago that she gave up. I mean, the Palace actually put out a question and answer on it because they were asked about it so much. But I don't know if I said it on the programme a few weeks ago. I was at an event with her at the Palace recently, and Emily Mortimer, the actress, I think Camilla knows her mother, Penny, because she used to ride out with her. And Queen Camilla said, "Oh, how's Penny?" And Emily said, "Oh, well, still not doing what she should do. She's still smoking." And Camilla just turned around and went, "Oh, still on the fags then." Yeah. And I think it's the kind of only comment that someone who used to smoke would come out with. It just made me laugh.
It's just not very royal, is it?
It's
just not, is it? You'd have to give up.
I mean, I think, and actually King Charles hates smoking.
Right.
Like, he's really intolerant of it. And I think it's going to be one of the things he would have been intolerant about her doing.
Well, remember his grandfather, had terrible health problems and lung cancer
smoking. That's right.
From
yes.
smoking.
Yeah.
So it's a big issue in the family.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, we're going to stick with Camilla for a moment, and to a question from Karen, who asks, "How is the Queen really doing?" Well, there's a big question, isn't there? Rebecca, you've been with her quite a bit recently. What's your impression?
I have. I've spoken to her a little bit about it. I mean, not at length, but exchanging the odd comment as you're kind of brushing past each other on engagements. And she's been really rotten, actually. She just really hasn't felt very well since she got back from that big trip to Australia and Samoa. And don't forget, she won't thank me for saying this, she's a 77-year-old woman, and it was an 11-day trip, 30,000 miles, and they were standing out, getting wet quite a lot. And she went down with pneumonia, and it's really stayed on her chest, and it's quite viral. And there is a bit of a strain going round, she's telling me, that seems to have been lingering longer than normal, and it's sapped all her energy. It's left her feeling really rotten. But she's definitely, I mean, when I saw her most recently, she looked a lot perkier, she was on good form, and I think she was just ploughing through until the Christmas break. And
looking forward to that Christmas wind down like we all do.
Kick the heels off.
Yeah.
Hopefully a good Christmas break will help her.
I hope so. But yeah, Sandringham's sounding very busy though. Goodness me. Well, to another royal health related question now, and MDP asks, will we ever know what the cause of death was for Queen Elizabeth? Was it cancer? Richard, this is a confusing one, isn't it?
Yes, it is, because we've had 2 books published that have both stated that the Queen Elizabeth had a bone cancer, but then on the cause of death, on her death certificate, it was just written as old age. And no, I don't think we ever will know definitively, because the Palace, I think, didn't want us to, or the Queen herself, and they just felt that she was of an age, and there was some dignity, and they didn't want to go into the details. But from everything we've heard, she had a series of conditions at the end of her life. And I think, we'll probably leave it at that.
Well, I think some things are allowed to be private to the end, aren't they? It's like, in any human being's life.
And she served her country with such dignity, and at the end of the day, she lived to a very grand old age. And as we saw with Prince Philip, as the doctors explained to me then, when you're that age, that you have any number of ailments, any one of which could be the one that finally ensures you pass away. And does it really matter at the end of the day? I suppose it does, in as much as I think we'd have more admiration for her, having worked right up until literally her dying day with a condition that like that. So I think, if anything, it would prove more admiration for her, but I don't think we need to really
Still
know.
feels weird, doesn't it? Anyway, Anne T has changed the subject. An interesting question about patronages. She asks, I'd like to know how some royals take on patronages outside of Great Britain. And the Princess Royal, for example, has one with the Lighthouse Museum in New York City. How do these transpire?
And can you remember the phrase for
No,
being
I
a
can't. I really can't.
horologist?
Thank you.
For her collection of lighthouses.
Yeah.
So they do have some foreign patronages, not lots, because obviously they like to be involved with their organisations, and obviously she can't constantly pop over to the United States to to go and look at a lighthouse museum. Obviously, they tend to be more within Commonwealth countries because we have an ongoing relationship with them, and particularly countries which are realms, which is where the British monarch is also head of state there. I know most recently, for example, Queen Camilla became patron of Nigeria's first sexual assault centre because she's got a particular interest in this field. And do you know what? They asked her. And so she said yes. So maybe that's the moral of the story. Ask and ye shall get. You never know.
There you go. That's that answered. Now, to
Let's
a question
crack
of
on.
politics now. And Mandeep asks, to what extent is the royal family popular enough to thwart an authoritarian wannabe? Richard, gosh, that's quite a question, isn't it? Are they popular enough?
That's really interesting. I mean, certainly all surveys suggest that the British royal family is popular and has a big majority of support among countrymen. But I mean, this was tested, for example, in Spain, where they have a monarchy. In 1981, there was a coup, and the colonels leading the coup thought that they might be able to have the king's support. But he came out in a TV address and made clear that they didn't, and that really was the end of that coup. So that won a lot of support for the constitutional monarchy in Spain, and really secured support for the monarchy since then. So, you know, that's when a monarchy sort of does prove its mettle, but it can prove in some circumstances a useful barrier against, you know, politicians who are getting too big for their boots. Or
Fascinating. But I suppose it's also, Rebecca, isn't it? It could be a question of timing, because it's not unfair to say that there have been phases where the royal family has not been as popular as it is currently.
Yeah, I mean, I think like any public figures, there are peaks and there are troughs. Although I think I'd argue that Queen Elizabeth, I mean, apart from, you know, maybe the time around the death of Princess Diana and the fire at Windsor and questions over their public finances, I think she was largely pretty steady in her popularity. And actually, I think King Charles has proved actually a lot of his detractors wrong, people who said he wouldn't be able to resist meddling in politics. I think he's actually been, you know, a remarkably good king. And I think even his naysayers would say that. And I'll tell you what was really interesting was going to your home country, Joe, when we went to Australia this autumn. Us British journalists really thought republicanism was going to be the big issue there. And actually I was surprised how little it was spoken about. And from speaking to people on the ground, they were explaining to me, actually, we feel quite a lot of disillusionment with the politicians we've got and the system that we've got for various reasons. And actually, some of us have come to quite appreciate a monarchy as being, as Richard rightly says, a buffer between us and them. There's someone who doesn't really have a dog in the race, as we say in this country, apart from wanting the best for their people. And I got the impression, and I'm sure our Australian viewers will tell me if I'm wrong, that the number of people really anti-monarchy out there are quite few and far between. The vast majority are either ambivalent, unless they're given a particularly viable option, or actually very much in favour of it, and that really surprised me.
Well, to the royals' popularity with their staff now, and Chrissy D asks, Rebecca English, you are looking stunning. That's not a question, but it's a fact. How do the royals spoil their staff at this time of year? Stunning, Rebecca, do tell us all. I just can't take my eyes off you.
Well, I can't take your eyes off your dress. What was the question? That's really embarrassed me now.
How do the royals spoil their staff at this time of year? I have a fun story about this as well, but you go first.
So they obviously have the Christmas parties that most, big offices and organisations have. They have their big official one at Buckingham Palace or at Windsor Castle, and they have their kind of smaller, departmental parties. But what they do get that most of us won't get, and I'm pretty sure we won't get at the Daily Mail, is a special homemade Christmas pudding. Everyone gets a Christmas pudding. In fact, I bumped into a former member of staff recently. I said, how's, looking forward to Christmas. It's their first Christmas outside of the Royal House. And I went, I'm going to really miss that Christmas pudding. I love that.
Well, I remember a friend of mine for many years, until he retired, was the chief locksmith at Buckingham Palace. And we'd go around there for usually a Boxing Day drink, because he only lived around the corner from us. And once I was drinking champagne from these beautiful cut glass crystal, and he'd been given them by the Queen and Prince Philip as a Christmas present.
Yeah, so I was
It's
going to say
amazing.
they do get a present as well, and normally it's something like that, or a beautiful mug, or a little kind of ornamental pillbox. And what they do is every year certain members of staff from different departments are chosen to get them off the Sovereign personally as a representative of their department, and I know that means an awful lot to those people who do, because they will actually be looked in the eye and said thank you for your service this year.
Amazing. Right, now here's a question that we have addressed before, but we're going to address it again. This one is from Amir Haswan, who asks, I have a question, but not the kind I think you expected. Oh, you'd be surprised. Why do you insist on calling the Princess of Wales Kate Middleton in your video titles when William has made it clear that she prefers Catherine? I know about the algorithm, etc., but your channel is well established and your videos will get found just the same. I'm sorry, but it's just disrespectful. Okay, well, we do expect that question. Richard, how would you answer this?
No, it's a good question. It's an interesting point, but it's just basically we only make these programs if people watch them, and we want as many people to watch them as possible. And what I'm told is that when they look at, they can see how people have found Palace Confidential, and that's from searching for various terms. And one of the most searched terms is Kate Middleton, and people are not really searching for Princess Catherine or Princess Kate or whatever. So that is why that name is still used quite a bit. I have to say my wife can't understand what the fuss is about at all, because she's Spanish, and their tradition is that women keep their maiden names throughout their life. But obviously in the English traditional system, you take a husband's name.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting point, but that's the technical reason.
Indeed, and Rebecca, we're not unaware of this, are we?
Yeah, and I understand why it exercises people, I really do. And what I do appreciate the Mail is I am not under any pressure to use Kate Middleton, and I won't. You will never see it in my copy. It will always be Catherine or Kate. I still use Kate sometimes in copy, because unfortunately you can't fit Catherine in a headline. So it sometimes will have to be Kate or Princess of Wales, but I will personally never ever use Kate Middleton. But I have to, I'm not the boss, and I have to respect that, that is how the algorithms do work, unfortunately. I would say it's a subject that's constantly up for debate. I think people are quite used to me debating this at length within the office hierarchy. So it is something we talk about a lot, and it may change in the future.
You might find that she eventually becomes better known as Princess Catherine,
yes,
in the way that Lady Diana eventually became known more as Princess Diana.
That's true. We did have a lot of years of Lady Di, didn't we? Not even Diana.
Yeah, we did, yeah.
It's true. Well, I mean, I promise you this is something that we are aware of. I know we won't always please everyone with that answer, but we are not, as some people suggest, being deliberately provocative or disrespectful. I think from all of our comments over the years, you would know how much we love our Princess of Wales. Now, to a fun question from Katie B. What are your favourite memories of meeting a member of the royal family? Richard, you go first.
I think I have to say it was with Prince Philip.
Well, I think I've only got one meeting with the royal family member. That's my favourite.
And for me, I think it's Prince Philip, because he always had something to say. And the thing about Philip was he was very interested in everyone. He really was probing. And at that time, I was at another newspaper, and he said to me, where are you from? And I said, oh, Daily Telegraph. And he said, which department? And I said, oh, the Social Diary. And he just looked at me and said, the fiction department. And so I thought,
that is some shade.
So I laughed politely, but yeah, that put me in my place.
Oh,
that's
shade.
A brilliant put down.
Oh my goodness. Rebecca, you must have so many. How on earth would you pick a favourite encounter?
I mean, I don't even know where to start on this, and that is one of the joys of my job. I think I might tell you one of my most embarrassing encounters, as long as it's just between us, obviously.
And our hundreds of thousands of loyal Palace Confidential viewers.
When I first met Queen Elizabeth for the first, and actually properly met her as opposed to covering on engagement, actually spoke to her. And I think, as I said before, I didn't come into this job as a royal fan, but, she's someone I'd grown up with. I was a kid there with my flag outside my school, 1977 Silver Jubilee, she drove past, she's iconic for us. And being slightly, as people say, slightly kind of, tongue-tied. And she was genuinely quite a shy person instinctively, and she could be quite a hard conversationalist, believe it or not, sometimes. I was standing in this room at this reception, and I was panicking and cast my round some inspiration, and I saw this horse racing trophy, and I did. Anyone who knows the film Dirty Dancing will know what I mean by I carried a watermelon moment. I just saw this trophy, and when I get nervous, I get a bit of verbal diarrhoea, and I just said, I know you're really keen on horse racing, Mum. I know nothing about horse racing, but my grandparents were greyhound trainers. Have you ever been to the dogs?
And has she? I actually want to know.
She just looked at me and just went, no. And I could see her look over my shoulder, like, who is this Muppet? And I heard someone say, Rebecca, English Daily Mail, and she just went, Daily Mail. I just walked on to the next person. Proper tumbleweed moment.
Well, are you sure that's the most embarrassing story?
I've no idea what you're referring to, Jo.
I'll take it to my grave. Anyway, Katie B also had this follow-up question. If you could be any member of the royal family, past or present, my goodness, who would you be and why? Richard, who are you choosing?
Oh gosh, that's a hard one, isn't it? You should have given me time to prepare.
Sorry,
I think
I like on the spot.
Maybe I'd say George III, and I'd make greater efforts to keep our American cousins with us.
Oh, that's so diplomatic, Richard.
Rebecca?
I'm still blushing after the last segment, so excuse me. I suppose recent members of the royal family, I would say the late Queen Mother, because I think, apart from obviously losing, sadly, her husband, King George VI, very young, I think she had a really magnificent life. I mean, she just looked like she thoroughly enjoyed herself there at Clarence House. I've heard about the parties she used to have and the kind of wonderful wits around her, and I think it sounds quite fabulous. So.
There you go, there's your answer. Well, to maybe the biggest question of them all from Greg, who asks, I heard that Rebecca English is related to a certain Duchess. True or false? Rebecca, what have you been hiding from us all these years? Spill.
Where on earth has this come from?
I don't know. It's, look,
have
Greg,
you two been,
Greg
gossiping
asks,
about
you
me or
answer.
something?
Yeah.
I mean, I once had a glass of rosé in the Duchess of Grantham pub, but I mean, I think that's the nearest. I mean, I'm afraid to say I come from very humble stock.
I don't know if the producer wants to say in my ear, but Greg hasn't said which Duchess he's even referring to.
No, I know. I've no idea where this comes from, and I've never heard this before, but I'm afraid I'm from very humble stock.
Do we believe her, Richard?
I believe everything Rebecca tells me.
Yeah, me too. That's the best answer. Right, moving on to a question from Red Flutterby now. Will there be a hashtag Super Sophie Section 2? She's been doing fantastic duties, and it's time to shine a spotlight on the Duchess of Edinburgh, and looking forward to her milestone next year. Go on then, Red Flutterby. We'll even give her an unsung hero fanfare. Rebecca, it feels like we've talked about Sophie on the programme more and more over the years, and it feels like she'll possibly be even more important in the coming years.
She definitely will. I think when I wrote a piece a few months ago for the Daily Mail for our subscribers about the relationship between her and Catherine, and was saying, friends were saying she's solid, she's a level head, she is going to be a brilliant sounding board for Catherine as her position develops. And I think, but what they also say is that actually she's not doing anything that she hasn't done before. She's not doing things any differently. It's just that people are recognising them a lot more because of the change in reign and obviously a smaller family and how her work's being projected more. I mean, obviously she's probably got better at it, like we all get better at our jobs over a long period of time. But they like to say, look, she's always been doing this. We're just very glad people are recognising it. But as the viewer suggests, that the landmark they're talking to is that she will unbelievably turn 60 in January. I'll be writing a big piece around that.
May I say, she doesn't look it.
She looks amazing. I mean, she's really up to her game in recent years. I think she looks fantastic. And I wouldn't be surprised, because members of the royal family don't tend to get birthday presents, because what do you give people who've probably got everything, but they tend to give them kind of recognition and honours. And I mean, I genuinely don't know this, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see the King recognise it, I don't know, maybe the Order of the Garter or something like that. I wouldn't be surprised if we see that.
Oh, and when is her birthday, remind me?
End of January.
Right, okay, so we don't have long to wait to find out about that. As for today, though, we've had some excellent questions. Quite tricky at times, quite detailed, but really interesting. Let us know below if you want us to do this again sometime. But for now, from great questions to great photographs, here are just some of the thousands of brilliant royal images that we have enjoyed this year. Thanks, of course, to Rebecca, to Richard, and to you, of course, for watching. For now, a very Merry Christmas. Until next time on Palace Confidential. Bye for now. Will the King take away Harry and Meghan's Sussex titles? Do Catherine's parents have to curtsy and bow to her? And how do royal surnames work? We'll answer all those and a lot more in a very special episode. Hello and welcome to an unusual episode of Palace Confidential, and I say unusual as the questions are coming from you, the viewers. Answering them today are two of your favourite royal experts, the Daily Mail's royal editor Rebecca English and the paper's diary editor Richard Eden. Now, a reminder to please subscribe to the Daily Mail Royals channel if you don't already, and if you have any royal related questions you want to ask, then pop them in the comments below and hopefully we can return to doing this on another episode soon. So let's kick things off with a question from KK, who writes, love, love, love your show. Well, thank you. Just curious, do Catherine's parents curtsy and bow to their daughter? That's an interesting one, Rebecca. What can you tell us?
I'll be honest, I've never asked anyone this, but I can't imagine it happening, I have to say, given what a kind of close, normal, natural family they are. But it did start me thinking, actually, that when William and Catherine become king, would they, in a more public setting, such as a coronation or official event, if they were to attend in a kind of private capacity, you will often see as the head of state and the spouse walk past, members of the family curtsying to them. Would they do that? And I suspect they would, because they're quite a respectful family, so I suspect they would in those circumstances.
I do like to think that perhaps on the occasion of a familial tiff, that maybe Catherine says something like, you know, that I could make you curtsy to me. You would. You'd love to pull that one on your mum.
Do you know, that's the kind of thing that I've got two sisters, we would have so done to each other if we could have when we were growing up.
But you get the impression, though, don't you, Richard? They are quite formal, William and Catherine. But you get the impression that William and Catherine are probably less formal with their families.
I think so, and with their friends. I mean, I think that it seems very unlikely that they would be asking people to bow or curtsy in a private setting. I think that's for formalities. I mean, look, it's a mark of respect. You know, in America, people would be respectful of the president, whoever holds that title, and it's that sort of thing for our monarch. But when it comes to private relations, I don't think they're bowing and scraping to each other.
Fun question though. Well, sticking with Catherine now, and Inez has a couple of questions about the royal wardrobe. I wanted to ask, where does Kate store her wardrobe at Kensington Palace? Since she's not wearing everything she owns, will she ever donate it to charity or with a fashion show? That would be amazing, wouldn't it? It would be amazing, but what about the late Queen's clothes? What's happening with those? Rebecca, you know everything about royal fashion. What can you tell us?
Oh, I don't know about that, but actually, it's a good question. And yes, I think a lot of her stuff is stored at Kensington Palace, but actually they're starting to use more of the space at Windsor Castle now, because obviously that's more convenient for them. Now they're living at Adelaide Cottage. It's why actually a lot more often than not see mentions in the court circular that William and Catherine have held meetings at Windsor Castle rather than coming into London. As for the late Queen, yes, all her stuff is still very much in storage at Buckingham Palace, and I'm hopeful we might over the coming years see some more exhibitions.
Oh, I hope so.
Of her outfits over the years, because I think they're so iconic.
And what a money spinner that would be.
Well, and the palace is always looking for ways to recoup the cost of the public purse, so it'd be a perfect way to do it, in my opinion.
How many outfits do we think the Princess of Wales has?
Oh, good question.
It's like how many beans in the jar, isn't it? It's like it's just, you know.
But she has started to reuse quite a lot of stuff. We recently saw.
Still, yeah, it's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, we recently saw her in Wales, for example. You know, re-wearing a tweed jacket that she'd worn, you know, a number of years present. And I'm sure that's something we'll see more as she develops in a royal role, just as we saw with the Queen, Princess Anne, you know, and others.
Joe's just thinking, does she have more outfits than me? You know?
I suspect yes. Well, Karen Nemechek writes, love the Q&A edition. I have wondered if William and Catherine's children's surnames change with each title change of their parents. Oh, that's interesting. Are they Windsors, are they Cambridges or Waleses, and do they ever use their surnames officially for school enrolment, for example? Happy New Year from Michigan. Richard, what do they use?
Yes, well, that's quite straightforward, because they were always Wales, because he was Prince William of Wales, and so they've stuck with that. So now he's the Prince of Wales, and the children are George Wales, Charlotte Wales and Louis Wales. So they haven't had to change their titles during their schooling. So yes, they are the Walesers.
I never think of them as having surnames, do you? It's
No,
just Prince George and...
that you need them for school, and often a tradition at British public schools is you're addressed by your surname.
I know, but it's quite glamorous not to have one. Do you know what I mean? It's like, that means you're really famous, doesn't it? But oh well, there you go. That's that question answered. And now to a question from the French gardener in Palm Beach. And I think we have another one from you a little later on. They ask, do you suppose that Prince William ever chats with his children about his ancestors like Henry VIII, Edward VIII, Prince John, etc.? The family history seems to be such an important part of cultivating identity. They must do, Rebecca. Do you think?
Yeah, the answer to that is yes, but in an age-appropriate way, because obviously let's not forget, you know, George, Charlotte and Louis are still pretty young. Even George, and
So let's talk of decapitations at the moment. Yeah.
And I know that's something, just from speaking to people around them, that William and Catherine have actually thought quite long and hard about over the years, is how and at what stage do they introduce this idea to their children that, you know, they're not entirely the same as the rest of their classmates. How do they balance that with
they must know that now.
They do, but, you know, I remember someone saying to me that, you know, George had come back, I think it was probably when he was about 5, 6, coming back, and just started to ask some unusual questions of his parents when he got home from school. So he was starting to become more aware of who he was. Obviously, maybe some of the other children have been saying things to him, you know, like my mummy says or my daddy says.
Yeah.
So, you know, that was something they said, we know we've got to we need to tackle with him, but we want to do in a way that's appropriate for him and doesn't overwhelm him at all. I think as he gets older, he will learn more about, you know, the kings and queens who happen to be his forebearers. But it's been quite slow and careful over.
There was an interesting insight in that in Prince Harry's memoirs, actually, because he got a very hard time at school from one particular history teacher who would sometimes say, when it came to sort of history of the kings and queens, he would say, oh, you know, you should know that. And Harry had to admit that he was very ignorant, actually.
Right.
Almost embarrassingly ignorant about kings and queens of England.
Do you know what? I think that is embarrassing, because I think how many of us could literally trace our forebears the way that that family can?
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
So I think eventually he gave him something like a ruler or something that had them all marked out, you know. But it was that sense of you should know this because of who you are.
Yeah.
I think with the royal family, a lot of what they do is by osmosis, you know, is just by being around these people and hearing people talk, rather than what we'd imagine them to do is sitting them down in a classroom and going, right, you need to know about your grandfather and your great-grandfather. It's a bit less formal than that.
But also imagine looking at, say, a portrait in the National Gallery of Henry VIII and thinking, oh, my forehead does that. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's really weird. There's like, because the DNA's there as well.
I'm not sure I could get my head around that, to be honest.
It's so weird, isn't it? Well, we're staying with George, Charlotte and Louis now, as Sierra Ponce asks, Rebecca, would Princess Charlotte's future children have titles or only George and Louis? What do we know? I don't think I even completely understand the question.
This is really interesting, and it's one that I can't necessarily answer in a simple way, because I think in years gone by we would have all assumed absolutely yes they would. You know, they're senior members of the royal family. But I'm not so sure, because we're seeing times change. You know, Edward and Sophie, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, for example, actively chose for their children not to have titles or be known as, you know, prince or princess. And, you know, while they're very high in the ranking of the order of succession now, you know, when Prince George eventually marries, has children, his siblings are going to go lower down the league table. So we could see a change in the future. So it's a bit of an unsatisfactory answer, I'm afraid, to say once upon a time 100% yes. In 20 years' time, who knows?
Yep. Well, a similar question from Tamaya Garner, who writes, question, will Princess Charlotte be considered the spare? Oh, that's just got such a loaded meaning now, hasn't it, after Harry's book, Richard?
I think it really has, because in the past it was always a sort of jokey way of referring to aristocrats. You know, you'd say you got the heir and the spare, which meant...
And it was never a derogatory thing, the way that Harry, I think, has framed it. It was just a joke.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, a joke, but also just the sort of the wife and mother of someone with a title would sort of think, oh, my job's done now, I've got an heir and a spare, as in a second son.
Yeah.
But, you know, with Harry, with his whole, you know, book full of whinging and the whole real edge about, oh, my life's being so hard, it really just sort of changed the way we look at it, or certainly that's what Harry was trying to do, and that was quite pathetic, really. But I think in this case, so it will be Charlotte, because the law was changed in Britain that there's no male inheritance for the royal family. It still would be whoever is oldest, so she is the spare, so to speak. And it's a tricky one how that's handled, but I think her parents will be very sensitive of Harry's experience, and Prince Andrew is another spare who, it didn't always go very well. So I think they'd be very conscious of that and how they organise things within the family.
Do you think that protocol would ever change, that the family within themselves could have a discussion and, perhaps Charlotte doesn't quite fancy being the spare, but Louis does, and they sort that out between themselves, or is that just verboten?
I suppose anything is possible. I'd find that a bit more unlikely. And touching back on what Richard was saying, I think there's some people that might see this being the spare as actually the better option of the two, because your life is less mapped out for you. And I mean, as a mum, I don't like to kind of prejudge what children will be like in years to come, because they are only children, let them live their lives. But I've seen nothing in Princess Charlotte that makes me think she is not the boss of that family, the boss of all those three kids. So I couldn't see her being pigeonholed in any way. She comes across as a really lovely, confident, natural,
The
accomplished
next
young girl.
Princess Anne.
Yeah, I've said it
Yes,
before.
and remember
I've said it
something
again.
really
Yeah.
interesting is that, you know, there's been rumours that William and Catherine might not want the younger children to have formal royal roles.
Yeah.
You know, we just don't know. So if, for example, Charlotte is able to have a career or a different life outside the royal family, she might be thrilled with that, and it would be, you know, George who might have to be resentful of knowing what he has to do with his life. So,
I mean, the fact is, Tamaya, we just don't know, but it's interesting, isn't it?
It's a great topic for debate and shows you how the family is constantly fluctuating as they need to do in order to be relevant in a modern age.
And we're staying with titles and designations for a moment because here's a nice comment from Joyce Kaminsky. Thank you for a lovely show answering viewers' questions. I am always confused about the HRH designation. Why do some royals have it and some don't? And how can you lose it, a la Prince Andrew? Rebecca, what's with the HRH?
So, the title, who can use an HRH?
Just took a very deep breath then. There's obviously a complicated answer coming.
It's complicated but kind of simple in some ways. This basically dates back to George V in 1917, who issued what's called letters patent. And that's actually the written will of the monarch, which is effectively the law.
Yeah.
And he decreed that the only people that could be HRH,
His Royal Highness or Her Royal Highness?
Prince or Princess, would be the children of the monarch, the sons of the children of the monarch, or the eldest son of the Prince of Wales.
Well, I'm confused already.
So very, very male-dominated, I think, is what you need to take away from that.
Okay.
Actually, Queen Elizabeth, brilliantly, I think, changed that slightly. So when William and Catherine were expecting their first child, she issued her own letters patent to say that that actually whatever sex that child would be, whether it would be male or female, would be the next in line to the throne. So we have seen this changing over the years. So basically, there's been a lot of kind of misnomer, I think, about Princess Anne. People have often kind of said, oh, Princess Anne chose not to have titles for her children. In actual fact, according to those letters patent, Zara and Peter would have never been Prince or Princess or HRHs. However, in that situation, what we may have expected is the Queen to say, look, because you are my beloved daughter, my Princess Royal, would you like your children to have titles? And Anne made very clear that if that were to be asked of her, the answer would be no. On the other hand, we've seen Prince Edward and Sophie, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, whose children would have expected to be HRHs and Prince and Princesses. They've actively decided they didn't want that for their children. So every generation slightly tweaks the rules.
Yeah.
To suit what they want, I suppose, because they're royal family and they can do things like that.
and we should say that Prince Andrew hasn't lost his HRH, for example. He still is His Royal Highness. He was asked not to use it in formal correspondence, formal business, which was the same for Prince Harry.
Prince Harry, except we have seen in recent weeks and months with some of the stories that have come out about Prince Andrew's ongoing business dealings, that people have been floating that HRH title around on his behalf.
And what was the story with both Princess Diana and Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, when they divorced Charles and Andrew?
So when you divorce, in their case, well, in Diana's case, she lost her HRH. So she became, and basically you get a comma in your name. So instead of the Princess of Wales, she was Diana, the Princess of Wales, which is basically, I suppose, a shorthand way of saying Diana, formerly the Princess of Wales. Now, there were some people who felt that she shouldn't have lost her HRH status, and that seemed a little bit punitive, but that is generally what happens.
And did that happen with Sarah Ferguson as well?
Well, she is now known as Sarah, Duchess of York, instead of the Duchess of York, although people still use the shorthand of the Duchess of York.
Yeah.
Well, Prince Andrew's never remarried, you see, so there's no other Duchess of York, so Fergie can still use it if she wants to.
Oh, there you go. Well, that works out for everyone. Now, speaking of titles, we have had a couple of quite mischievous questions along a similar line. You lot are terrible.
I think I know where this is going as well.
From Margaret Wolfe, who asked, when will Charles III take away the Sussex titles? While Savannah Dawkins was more direct, how long is KC3? KC3 sounds a bit R2D2 to me. How long is KC3 going to put up with the dastardly duo without taking their titles away? Now, Richard, they're no longer HRHs, But from a technical point of view, could he take away the titles Duke and Duchess of Sussex?
Strictly speaking, they are actually still HRHs, but like with Prince Andrew, they were just not asked not to use those titles in official business.
Yeah.
But KC3, or King Charles III, as we...
it might stick, KC3.
We prefer to refer to him.
Yeah.
The truth is, he can do that whenever he wants. I've called for him to do this in several articles
You have?
that I've written, but so far he hasn't listened to me.
Oh.
But no, he can do it whenever he wants. It's very straightforward, and he issues, some command or however you want to say it, letters patent, sends it to Parliament, gets parliamentary approval for them to have their title stripped, or for them to be removed, from Harry to be removed from the line of succession. So it can be done whenever he chooses.
I mean, it would be a big antagonistic move, wouldn't it, Rebecca?
Yeah, and I've nailed my colours to the mast on this, from day one, having spoken to people, pretty close to the king. And the feeling was from the start to do that would be seen as unduly punitive. It would be almost like echoing what happened to his late mother. And I think, as we said just a few minutes ago, that there were those that felt that was unfair on the Princess of Wales, the late Princess of Wales, and it's just not something he would do.
Frankly, you don't want to give him something else to whinge about.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it would add to that sense of victimhood.
Yeah.
And I think certainly as we film this programme, and who knows the twists and turns that is going to go on over the years to come, but the feeling is that at some point there may be a time that the King and Prince Harry might start to repair their relationship slightly, and if he was to have done that, that would have probably been quite a big stumbling block to it. So who knows? Look, I mean, you can never say never, but I really think that's not going to happen in that case.
Okay, well, you've heard it here first. Now, we're sticking with the Sussexes for now, the Sussexes as they are. Judy K. Anderson asks, does Harry own any of the properties owned by the royals or by England and loaned to the family? I feel like you're going to know everything on this, Richard. Does he?
So no, he doesn't. And their last property they had was Frogmore Cottage, which was given to them as a gift by Queen Elizabeth, and then that's all gone. And that's one of the big things about quitting royal duties, leaving the country. I mean, my goodness, if Harry and Meghan had stayed, I mean, I'm sure they would have been very generously looked after by King Charles, and for example, they would have almost certainly been given a Scottish residence, I would have thought. And there's various places that they would have been offered. We've seen with William and Catherine that they have, they've got a country place in Norfolk, they've got a place at Windsor, and then Kensington Palace. So Harry and Meghan would have had places like that, but they've instead they prefer their villa in Montecito, California.
Indeed. But Rebecca, obviously our king is a man of some means. If he wanted to, he could provide Harry with property, but I guess in the current situation, is that quite complicated?
I suppose he could provide them with a property out of his personal fortune. As a father, buy him a house somewhere. I mean, he could do that. They don't tend to do that, but he could do. Because, of course, a lot of these properties are what we call Crown Estate properties, so they're not actually the King's property. It's actually owned by an independent organisation, but obviously with very close links with the Crown, which is why they will have a lot of these properties on long-term leases, such as Royal Lodge. Prince Andrew has a 150-year lease on it. It's a Crown Estate property, so although we say it's his house, he ultimately doesn't own it, he couldn't sell it, but the assumption is that lease may be then taken up by another generation of the royals. And obviously Frogmore was one of those such properties. So if Harry decided he wanted to come back and spend more time in the UK because he'd cleared up these ongoing concerns he's got about security or had repaired his relationship with his family, they could still offer him a Crown Estate property. And of course, Frogmore is still empty. And has been empty ever since they were kicked out by the King because of this ongoing situation. So,
Okay.
Depends if Prince Andrew takes up residence in it, and we don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
No, everyone's really down on Frogmore. I'll have it.
I mean, it's modest, I've been told, compared to something like Royal Lodge, but it's still a really glorious 5-bedroomed home with stunning grounds in them.
In a very good location.
Yeah. location, as we know, yeah.
Let's hear from Cindy Marchak now, who writes, "From where I sit in Tucson, Arizona in the USA, the middle of the desert, I want to compliment all of the contributors on Palace Confidential." Well, thank you. I enjoy keeping up with the royals and all the goings on. Rebecca, congrats. You look quite beautiful. Congrats on your face, Rebecca. My question, Cindy's question is this. If Harry and Meghan were wanting to live their lives privately, why does the media, both in the US and in England, even bother to report on anything concerning them? Not a judgment, but a question and observation. I bet you've got something to say, Richard. How would you answer that?
Well, at the Daily Mail, our duty is to write about stories and people we think the readers will be interested in. And, you know, we know that they are very interested in Harry and Meghan still. And, I mean, really, what's interesting is how that's changed, because people used to love reading about Harry, frankly, because they really loved him. He was the most popular member of the royal family. But these days, they seem to prefer sort of seeing what Harry and Meghan are doing, because it's sort of like cringy. It's now, oh no, what are they up to now?
Yeah.
But they are still interested, for better or worse.
And sorry to interrupt you.
No,
I would add to that to say that, unfortunately, some of the decisions they make still have an effect on our royal family, both practically and the way they're viewed publicly. And a lot of what they've done in recent years in terms of the books, the attacks on them, unfortunately that's something the family is still struggling to distance themselves from reputationally, which I would say is very unfair on the royal family, but unfortunately that's the way it is. So as I say, I think it will become less relevant as the years go on, but for the time being it still has an effect on our
And it's unusual.
Now.
I mean, come on, we've got, there's a programme with Meghan on Netflix, a whole series. Well, you don't often have members of the royal family having a whole series on TV.
It is news.
So
it's news.
We want to know what that's about.
That brings me to a point I wanted to raise that's, I have got a slight issue in the question of them wanting to live their lives privately. I just don't think they actually do want to live their lives privately. And I think a lot of people felt like, well, fair enough, they don't like being under the scrutiny of being part of the royal family, but I think they still want to be famous. Am I wrong?
They certainly want the fame that's associated with making a lot of money, minimum effort with maximum output. So they do want that. I would argue maybe Harry wants privacy more than Meghan, I would say, just knowing what he was like as a member of the royal family. And he always slightly struggled with his time in the public spotlight. There's some things he liked about it, there's other things he didn't. But I have to say I agree. I mean, I don't think they've been based on the fact they've done multiple television shows, interviews, books. They are a couple who are struggling to stay out of the spotlight.
I'm reminded of the South Park parody of the World Privacy Tour. It's like, that's kind of where I'm at.
And I have to say, I think that, although kind of people were laughing about it at the time, was hugely damaging for them reputationally, because I think it put into a very relatable way what a lot of people were thinking.
Well, moving on to the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh now, and to a question from Anne Garnsey, who asks, I still want to know about Bagshot Park, where Edward and Sophie live. Do they own it? Rebecca, what do we know about Bagshot?
Well, going back to our previous conversation, Bagshot Park is one of these Crown Estate properties, so actually the simple answer is no, they don't. But very much like Royal Lodge and other properties, it was kind of given, in inverted commas, to them as a wedding present by the Queen, and they have a 150-year lease on it. Now, we don't know what the terms of that lease is, we don't know.
Where is it, remind me?
It's in Surrey. Yeah. It's a kind of stone's throw from Windsor, which has been lovely, because that's why they had such a good relationship with the Queen, and their children were able to see so much of the Queen and Prince Philip as they were growing up, because they really weren't that far away. They've got it for 150 years, so we're never going to see them moving out of it, but it's not theirs to own. They can't sell it. I'm sure if they wanted one of their children, James or Louise, to inherit it after them, that would be possible under the terms of the lease. But
and they want to stay there, and no one wants them out, so it's great.
Yeah, exactly.
quite
No
nice.
one's got any
Yeah.
beef with the
very
Edinburghs at all.
straightforward.
Yeah.
Blimey, that's unusual. Well, Catherine writes, I'm curious about what languages members of the royal family speak. I understand King Charles speaks German and has studied Welsh. I'm not aware of other members of the family speaking a language other than English. In my humble opinion, I would think Welsh would be mandatory for the family as they often meet heads of state from around the world. I would think members of the family would learn at least another language or two. Europeans are known for being multilingual. Is this true for the royal family? That's an interesting question, isn't it, Rebecca? But there are a few languages among them. Am I right?
It's a great question, actually.
Yeah.
That's kind of put me on the spot, but I think I've got some answer to it. Go back a generation, Queen Elizabeth was fluent in French. She didn't go to school, but she was educated at home and she was educated to speak the French language, which interestingly is why until very recently, even the menus at state banquets were issued in French, regardless of who the guest was, regardless of the fact that most of us were trying to read them, were English. And we'd often sit there on the night of a state banquet. We were put into a little separate room, and after having looked at the table, we watched proceedings on TV and we're given the menu. And we're all sitting there kind of, you know, with our dictionaries or trying to Google it. It was like, what on earth does this long word mean? When actually it's something like turbot, you know. So she spoke fluent French.
What's wrong with an entrecote and frites? Eh?
Exactly. You won't get that as a state banquet. If you ever get invited just to kind of manage expectations, Joe. So King Charles, did speak very fluent Welsh, and he actually actively learnt the language, went to school to learn it when he became Prince of Wales. I also happen to know in recent years he's been having lessons in Arabic. He was very interested to learn to speak Arabic as part of this role he developed as Prince of Wales of promoting community and interfaith harmony.
Great.
He also speaks pretty rudimentary but good, you know, nevertheless quite good French. And I always notice with the King, when he goes anywhere or when he has an incoming state visit, he makes a point of learning some of that language so he can introduce it into his speeches. So, you know, I was at Highgrove with him a few weeks ago and we heard him speak in Italian. And actually I asked, people around the royal family tend to always say, oh, they're wonderful. But actually I spoke to somebody who said, actually, it was genuinely pretty good. His accent wasn't that bad. And we've also seen...
Not that bad. Oh, damning with faint praise.
There's some great video footage, I think, from back in the day when he went to Papua New Guinea and he spoke in pidgin English.
I think I
which
remember
was
that.
something to behold,
Yeah.
and Prince Philip actually
Yeah.
gave a speech in pidgin English as well. So he's pretty well versed. Queen Camilla, I learnt the other day, and I didn't know that. She went to school in Paris for a year, so her French is not that bad. I did not know that about
And
her.
I believe Princess Anne speaks German.
She does. I mean, Prince William, I'll be honest, I don't know what second language he speaks, but in English schools, we're all taught a second or often third language. It's often German or Spanish or French, sometimes Italian.
And a former unsung hero, Prince Michael of Kent, can do Russian.
Russian, yeah, he's
Yeah.
obviously got very
That's hard.
strong links with
Yeah.
the Russian royal family. I think the trouble is, as a race, as English speakers, we are quite lazy about our languages.
Well,
because
I was
so
going to ask
many-
our panel, how many languages do you guys know?
Oh, Joe, that's mean.
You speak Spanish, don't you, Richard?
Yes, I've got a degree in Spanish and
Yeah.
I did French
I mean,
at
I am
school.
dreadful. I speak English and Australian. That's about it.
I did schoolgirl French and I speak Spanish, you know, a bit better than
So I'm the
schoolgirl
dunce.
Spanish.
Yeah, yeah.
Although when we were at this Italian dinner at Highgrove the other day, the Italian, very charismatic Italian chef put me on the spot and said, well, do you speak any Italian? Because I was commenting on how brilliant his English was, that he even knew English slang. And he said, well, what do you say in Italian? And all I could say was 4 beers, please, in Italian.
Well, that's very useful.
I said, after spending a couple of months there, that's about the only thing I can remember. But he actually thought that was quite funny.
Oh, did he?
So-
Okay, all right. Because if it was a French person, probably would have looked at you in disgust.
Guys, he found that quite funny.
Anyway, well, what do you make, Richard, of the suggestion that Catherine makes that they should all speak Welsh?
I love this suggestion. I mean, Welsh is a difficult language to
It is.
learn, but when Prince Charles became Prince of Wales, he went on an intensive, I think it was like 9-week course at Aberystwyth University to make sure that he could speak Welsh, but I'm not sure I would introduce it for the rest of the royal family as well. That could be quite extreme. But then again, yeah, great. I don't speak Welsh myself, even though I did go to the University of Wales, so I'm not going to lecture others on learning the language.
It is a difficult.
I know one word in Welsh.
Oh no, what is it?
Actually, now I know how to say good morning and good night, but also cwtch,
What
which
does that
means
mean?
cuddle in Welsh, and they use it
But
for
that's
everything.
spelled like with a W in it, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Well, there's an insight into Rebecca's private life.
Richard, because you say to your kids, "Come and have a cwtch,"
Okay.
and it's a very sweet word.
Oh, can I have a coach later?
You can have a
Thanks.
cwtch, Joe.
Right. Well, to a question now about a royal who is sadly no longer with us, and this is from Stephen R, who asks: the Queen Mother was said to enjoy the goring. Any information about their love, the royal family, of this famous hotel? Now, Richard, you're an expert on the society scene, venues. This question you must have all the answers.
I do love the Goring. It's a great hotel, and it's literally a stone's throw from Buckingham Palace.
Yes.
Which is why it became very popular, particularly with Queen Elizabeth. We were talking about Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother then, but her daughter, Queen Elizabeth as well, who'd often have parties there and events for staff. But it's a family-run hotel. There's lots of sort of character to it. And in fact, the Queen Mother was such a regular that there was a particular dish which she really loved, and they sort of added it to their menu, and it's still there.
Oh,
I'm trying to think
what
what it was. I think it's eggs drum kilbo. It's
yes.
basically quail's eggs with lobster.
No,
So
not
you-
ordering that. No.
No, I think it's very tasty. I have tried it myself, and that's on the menu there. So yeah, great place.
And apparently, Princess Catherine doesn't mind a bit of a stop at the Goring. Is
Well,
that true?
that's where all the family, all the Middleton family stayed. They basically sort of hired the whole hotel before Catherine's wedding, and you might remember seeing the first glimpses I think we had of her dress was her leaving the hotel. So it's very happy memories.
It's very old English, I would say, and
Yeah.
it's got a very pretty garden, which obviously is quite unusual in central London. So it's and it's not really overlooked. It's very private, so it's everything that they could possibly want.
I have to say, the few occasions that I met Queen Elizabeth, all of them were at the Goring.
The few occasions that you met Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Wow. This hasn't come up very often, has it?
No, as in Queen Elizabeth or Queen Elizabeth, Queen Mother.
Queen Elizabeth, the monarch.
Yeah.
Wow.
She did like attending parties there.
I have invested in quite a few glasses of champagne at the Goring. It's a
Have
nice
you
bar.
now?
Yeah, it's a nice bar. Well, Pam de Cavett asks, why is Camilla Queen Consort, but Prince Philip wasn't King Consort? What's the answer, Rebecca?
Well, king consorts don't exist, but let me take you back a step. So every spouse of a king is a queen consort, but they never use that title. And we had do you remember a big debate about this when...
I don't like the word. It reminds me too
King
much of the
and-
word concubine.
That's one way of looking at it,
Don't
Joe.
like it. Yeah.
But also there's a big debate when, King Charles acceded the throne as to why they referred to Camilla as Queen Consort to start off with and then dropped it after a few months. And that was simply because, look, it was very raw. If someone said the Queen, they would have automatically thought of Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah.
But after a time, they decided to adopt what we've always adopted. And of course, that's why the Queen Mother was Queen Elizabeth. We've had Queen Mary, Queen Alexandra. It's always been Queen. We've never called them Queen Consort. But the equivalent King Consort doesn't exist. And that goes back to kind of good old-fashioned sexism, that a king would always be considered more senior than a queen. And obviously when you have a queen regnant, who is the person who's in the bloodline, who was actually the monarch, you didn't want someone that would be kind of higher up than her effectively. Yeah. So what they've done is kind of make up the rules as they go along. So every husband of a queen regnant, they've effectively chosen their own title. So
right.
Prince Albert became Prince Consort after a while. Now we know that Prince Philip didn't want that, but what he was, although he was a prince of Greece, so they made him a Prince of the United Kingdom and then gave him the very senior title of Duke of Edinburgh. So they kind of made up the rules as they go along. There's also another strand to this that basically kind of also dates back to the Tudor times when Queen Mary, the daughter of Henry VIII, was on the throne and she married King Philip of Spain. Now they were both fervent Catholics at a time when the country was being alternated between Protestantism and Catholicism. So when Protestantism came back in, they wanted to ensure that, if a future queen ever married someone outside of the religion, that they wouldn't use it as a back door to get Catholicism back in. I mean, sorry, you did ask the question, Jo, and you want a proper answer.
It's just amazing. Just coming back to Prince Philip for a minute, Richard, he wasn't overly happy with the surname situation, was he?
No, I think as anyone who watched the Netflix series The Crown will know.
That documentary.
Well, often Netflix was very inaccurate in a lot of its depictions, but in this case it was largely accurate, in that there was a disagreement between Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip over surnames. And what this was about was Prince Philip was, he was a proud man, and he wanted to keep his surname, which was Mountbatten, and he wanted that to be for his children. Well, the Queen insisted eventually, she may have been advised on this, that they needed to keep the name Windsor. Now, Windsor was the name adopted back in 1917, when there was a lot of anti-German feeling, obviously, during the First World War, and you also had the revolution in Russia, where the royal family were murdered. So it was a very sensitive time for the royal family, and so they dropped their German name, which Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, if I pronounce that correctly,
well done. Yep.
And replaced it with the very English Windsor. So the Queen was keen to maintain this, so they came to a compromise where the children, the male children, would be Mountbatten Windsors. And we've seen that. They still use it for the male line. And in fact, the viewers might remember that Prince Harry and Meghan named their children when they were Archie and Lilibet, they were Archie Mountbatten Windsor. So they've kept using those surnames as well.
And take it right up to present day. And there's a certain little cute puppy dog called Windsor, I believe.
Yeah, that's my dog. It's Windsor, but that was because
he the lineage.
Sort of, in that he came from a farm where you could literally see Windsor Castle in the background.
So. We would expect nothing less of you, Richard.
Exactly. Well, the French gardener's back and asking, why did Prince Philip live on the farm apart from the Queen? Did he simply like being out of the limelight toward the end of his life? Rebecca, what was going on there? Is it just the secret of a blissfully happy marriage, separate houses? What?
It sounds like they've got it nailed to me, doesn't it?
Certainly did, yeah.
So when Prince Philip retired from public life in, I was going to say 1917, 2017.
Yeah, just 100 years out.
Yeah, exactly.
Take a leap.
Sometimes with this job, it feels like you lived 100 years in one day, I tell you, love.
Yeah.
In 2017, one of the things he wanted to do at the grand old age of 96, and I think everyone felt, including his wife, he'd earned that retirement, was he really wanted to step away from the public, limelight. He didn't want a half in, half out option. He said, I've done my bit, that's it. And as part of that, he wanted to go and live a quiet life in the countryside. He didn't want to be in the bubble of Buckingham Palace. And they had this wonderful property, Wood Farm at Sandringham, which is grand by most circumstances, but not overly so. In fact, they needed to kind of put in a new bathroom for him to really make it habitable for someone to live in full time. And he wanted to paint there, he wanted to potter around the fields, have friends to stay. And, I'm sure it was a matter of, regret for her in some ways, but she just genuinely felt that she needed to do her duty by her husband, and he'd earned it. And she still would go and visit him very regularly. Sandra, and obviously when we had the COVID pandemic, they actually moved back in together because they realised they wouldn't see each other for such long periods of time. I know, it feels like a lifetime ago, doesn't it? And I think most people would understand in the circumstances that was, perfectly acceptable.
Scott McCarter's up next, and he writes to ask, do the panel think His Majesty will appoint the biographers of both his parents in 2025, as a decent interval will have elapsed since their deaths? My picks would be Robert Hardman for Prince Philip and Andrew Roberts for Queen Elizabeth II. Rebecca, I'd never thought of that. It's an interesting process of picking biographers, isn't it?
It is. It's not something they put out a job advert for. No. It's more done in terms of kind of hushed conversations with people in the know. Who do we think would be the suitable person to handle this? Because it's a historic project.
Do people campaign for it? Do they put themselves forward?
I'm sure they do, but in a kind of slightly more subtle way,
Right.
rather than a vote for me type
Yeah.
way. I mean, obviously, when Queen Elizabeth, Queen Mother, died, they appointed William Shawcross, her biographer, within a year. So I can understand why the question is phrased in this way. Look, it's been a suitable period of time, it's been a couple of years. Would we not see that now? The only thing I would say is that I think, obviously, because she was monarch and she ruled for 70 years, the project of taking on the Queen Elizabeth's,
the pressure.
you know, her diaries, her papers spanning that time, it would be a full-time job, probably lasting decades itself to do it justice. So I can imagine that's something they won't rush into. Also, a lot of things she would have been writing about would have been in, for us, you know, fairly recent memory, and I can imagine there might be some kind of diplomatic issues, you know, going forwards. I tell you what, though, I would love to get my hands on Prince Philip's papers.
Oh, yeah.
Can you imagine the honesty he would have used in them? I mean, whoever...
I can imagine there's some salty text in there.
Whoever bags Prince Philip's papers, I think that's going to be a great, great job.
Gosh, well, that's amazing. Now, Melinda Flick wants to know, did a lot of the royal family smoke at one time? I thought Princess Margaret used to. I know I've seen many pictures where she was smoking. Richard, are they big old smokers?
Well, smoking's a big issue for the royal family because of George VI was a heavy smoker and then had lung cancer, and this really haunted the Queen, I think. And in fact, Prince Philip was a smoker, but he gave up on the day of his wedding because he knew how much his wife hated the habit and thought now's a good time to give it up. But not many members of the royal family smoke now. I think Queen Camilla's given up. Prince Harry certainly used to smoke, and in fact it's well known that he would smoke other substances too. But that's in the past, according to his book.
Yes.
So we'll make that clear for legal reasons. But otherwise now, I'm not sure who else smokes. If they do, they keep it pretty quiet. I think Princess Eugenie certainly used to smoke. I've seen her, I think, having a fag or two. Yeah. But anyway, maybe you should keep that quiet.
That's why you're such a good social diarist, Richard. You don't keep it quiet, you tell everyone.
The problem with being a diarist is that the best thing is to smoke, because a lot of the gossip you'll get will be when the smokers leave the buildings these days to go and stand outside, you know. So even if you don't smoke, you need to sort of hang round and maybe pretend to.
I did a couple of interviews a year or so ago to mark Prince Edward's 60th birthday, and someone who does a lot of work with him in a kind of charitable field and has a lot of admiration to him said, "Oh, I've got a great story about Camilla." I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "We had a great conversation with her when we were both happened to be at this party together." And I mean, this was many, many moons ago. And we were both outside having a quick cigarette, you know, behind the bushes so no one could see us. You know, we were sharing a packet of fags together. But you're right, I mean, she hasn't smoked for, I would say, 10 or 15 years, maybe more.
Yeah. Well, I don't think the King likes the habit, does
he really doesn't like it. I suspect, personally, because he's quite a healthy person, and also because of his grandfather as well, who he does have certain memories of. Yeah,
it stinks.
Yeah, and we're living in different times now, where it kind of is much less acceptable.
Well, I think we should say that the first monarch, James I, when at the time when tobacco was coming from the Americas, he thought it was revolting. He actually wrote a treatise against tobacco and talked about how unpleasant it was.
Wow.
So I didn't know that.
I did not know that.
He was one of the early pioneers of the anti-smoking movement.
Every day is a school day on Palace Confidential.
It's
great, isn't it? Now, finally, we have a question from Brian Battle, probably the most pressing one for me. Is that man a Hank Marvin lookalike? Here they are on screen, side by side. Richard, are you? We assume that he's talking about our own Richard. We'll put him and rock legend Hank up on the screen and you can compare. Let us know what you think in the comments below. And of course, any other questions that you may have. Care to comment, Richard?
I think it's just the glasses, actually. Maybe I should change my specs. But Hank Marvin's a great man. Has lived in Perth, Australia, I think, for many years. So I'm honoured to be compared to the great guitarist.
And as they say, have you ever seen them in the same room together?
Well, quite. You've made us think, Brian Battle. But thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be back on Thursday. My thanks as always to Rebecca, Richard, and to you for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Hello, I'm Robert Hardman. I'm a Daily Mail columnist and I've been writing books and documentaries about the royal family, broadcasting and commentating at royal events for many years. And I've just written a new biography of the King, Charles III, The Inside Story, out now. And so I've been asked to answer your questions. And we've had a great number of questions, all from viewers of the Daily Mail Royals YouTube channel. So let's get going. A lot to do, needless to say, with Harry and Meghan. This one from Mega Bish: what's stopping King Charles III from taking a leaf out of Denmark's Queen Margrethe's book and removing the kids, one of which is a foreign national, of his US-based younger son Harry from the line of succession? I've had another one here, Christine from the UK and USA. Like many people, I would like to understand why King Charles is silent when Meghan and Harry continue to cause embarrassment and hurt. Louise Beer: when is he going to remove Harry and Meghan's titles, and so on? Why is King Charles afraid of Harry? Asked somebody else. That's just a cross-section. In a nutshell, the King is both the head of state, he's head of the nation, and he's head of a family. And he would ideally like the family to at least get on with one another, and any talk of removing titles, removing people from the line of succession, all this stuff, it would be very vindictive. It's something that isn't really necessary. Yes, Harry and Meghan have fired a few pot shots at the monarchy in recent years, most notably that documentary with Oprah Winfrey, then the 6-part Netflix series, Harry and Meghan. But, and of course not forgetting Harry's book, Spare, as well, which came out just after the King came to the throne. But let's not forget that things have quietened down in the last year or two, to the point where we haven't really heard much from Montecito on the monarchy itself. The Duchess of Sussex is embarking on a new career in lifestyle, and I get the sense that generally things are fairly calm. As I say in my book, there is a reason why relations between the King and his younger son are particularly strained at the moment, and that's simply the fact that Harry is suing the British government over his security. The legal action is still ongoing, and you can't have a situation where the King, as head of the judiciary, is talking to a plaintiff in a legal case, because if any of that conversation leaked out or emerged or was used in court, it would bring the whole case to a halt. It would make a mockery of the system. So for fairly straightforward constitutional reasons, they can't really just pick up the phone and chat. I think that may change in time. Things definitely seem to have calmed down in recent years. Just on the point of titles, it's very complicated. Like so many royal things are, you've got 4 different types of title. You've got the HRH style, you've got the fact that Harry is a prince, you've got the Dukedom of Sussex with the courtesy titles that go with it, and you've got Harry's knighthood. He's a GCVO, Knight Grand Commander of the Royal Victorian Order. So those are all the different titles. To take them away, theoretically the King could do it. As I say, it would be very vindictive. It could possibly stir up legal action. We know that Harry is fairly litigious, and there could be an argument for asking for some sort of judicial review on that, even though it is in the monarch's gift, certainly, to take away the HRH and the prince bit. The Dukedom of Sussex, slightly more complicated. General agreement is that would probably need to be done by Parliament. Is a busy government really going to want to devote parliamentary time to taking away a title? Again, I don't think so. I think it's just leave it be. That's what's going to happen. Cheryl Lambert's asked, it's often been insinuated that King Charles III and his father, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, didn't have a particularly close relationship. If true, was this always the case, or did it change for the better as they grew older? Well, I mean, history is full of stories of heirs to the throne who have their quarrels with the next generation up. I mean, like any father-son relationship, it had its wobbles. But actually, the more I've looked at the relationship between Prince Charles as was Prince Philip, the late Prince Philip, you see so many similarities. I mean, their love of the environment, for example. Prince Philip's was one of the co-founders of the World Wildlife Fund. I mean, a hugely important move in the early 60s that led on to so many other things. They both love painting. They both have a keen interest in the spiritual side of things. Yes, I mean they did quarrel like lots of generations do. They had differences of opinion over everything from layout of royal houses to the running of estates. Prince Charles, as we know, is a big fan of all things organic. Prince Philip wasn't, but I interviewed him just after the death of Prince Philip for a documentary I wrote called Prince Philip Remembered, and we interviewed all the members of the family, starting with and led by Prince Charles, now King Charles, and he was a devoted son, and he still thinks and looks back fondly. I've heard him sort of refer to things his father did, and suddenly he'll sort of burst out laughing because, yes, I mean, Prince Philip was a famously demanding kind of alpha kind of guy, but they certainly they got on, and he's very fondly remembered. Does King Charles still go horse riding like Queen Elizabeth did? He's a very good rider. He's certainly, I would say, the first monarch who's ever actually competed in a proper race. He used to be a national hunt jockey, an amateur jockey in his youth. He's a risk taker. He liked to ride at speed, a very good polo player. But no, he doesn't ride anymore. The late Queen did ride. She loved her fell pony Emma. She was riding her every year right up until her death. Emma, the fell pony, still lives in the park at Windsor. But no, the King, he liked to ride for sport, for speed, and above all for ceremonial purposes. Now, he did ride in the 2023 birthday parade as King. He got on a particularly frisky mare called Noble, a gift to the royal family from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. I don't quite know why he decided to ride Noble, because for years he used to ride a wonderful old horse called George, who just plodded along and frankly wouldn't have been startled by a 10-ton bomb going off next to him. Noble was rather jumpy, as you may have seen on the footage at the time, and the King had to work quite hard to get Noble up to Horse Guards and then through the parade and back again. So he certainly can ride a horse, but for now he doesn't, and I think it's unlikely we'll see him back on one anytime soon. Fuzzy Puppet has asked, who are King Charles's closest friends? I don't recall reading much about that aspect of his life over the years. Well, like all of us, he's got plenty of friends. He's very loyal to his friends. They haven't changed much over the years. I think of people like Lord Soames now, Nicholas Soames, who's been a great chum since youth. The Duke and Duchess of Wellington, they're great friends. I mean, within the family, cousins like Lord Snowdon, Lady Sarah Armstrong-Jones, as well as Lady Sarah Chatto, they're very close. His old skiing friends, Charlie and Patty Palmer-Tompkinson, they go back a long way. Their daughter, Santa, and her writer husband, Simon, Santa and Simon Sebag Montefiore, they're friends, they're good friends. You really need to look at that pew, or those pews at the coronation. Look at the north transept at the coronation. If you get that seating plan and you just see who's there, who the good chums are, who gets a good view, whether it's people like Stephen Fry, the late Queen's maid of honour, Lady Glenconnor, she's another one. Those are the chums. Sue Hussey, Lady Hussey, again, someone who's just been there all the way through his life, really, and he stays loyal to his friends, like so many other people. Pam Cathcart. Is King Charles still actively involved in the development he built? Poundbury in Cornwall. Actually, it was in Dorset, I think, Pam. Is it taken over by William now? He put so much work into it, a lovely village. Yes, Poundbury in Dorset. He did also build a village in Cornwall, as you mentioned, Pam, called Nansledden. They are all technically part of the Duchy of Cornwall, so they now come under the orbit of Prince William now as Prince of Wales, Duke of Cornwall. But of course, I mean, as the founder, the King takes a a very keen interest. I think if you've created something like Poundbury, and I've been there quite recently with him, and he's incredibly proud of the place. I mean, when he first had the idea of this thing back in the 80s, taking a bit of farmland outside Dorchester and building a town where essentially it was designed around people rather than around cars, traffic, ring roads and all that stuff. It was somewhere where people would want to live, where they could walk to the shops. They could still have a car, and also it'd be designed to look nice. It wouldn't just be like a load of boxed homes. And at the time, you know, the usual knockers, the architectural critics and people sort of said, oh, it's pastiche, it's a sort of toy village. You go down there, you talk to the people who live there, they love it, and it's expanded and it keeps on expanding because more and more people want to live there. Thousands of people live there now. He's very keen to make sure it doesn't just become a retirement home. It's got to live from generation to generation. So it's got a new school there. It's got that must-have that we all want next to us, Waitrose, there you go, it's got one of them. But it's got housing at every level, from affordable housing right the way through to detached homes. It's a success. And if only more towns could be like Poundbury is all I can say. Right, moving on. Kayla Willett has asked, I'm always curious to know who people want to meet from history. If the king could have a conversation with a previous monarch, artist, writer, who would it be and why? And what historical mystery is he dying to know the answer to? I think that's a great question, Kayla. Who would the king really like to talk to if he could go back in time, particularly in terms of previous monarchs? I'm going to stick my neck out here. I think he would be particularly interested in George III. I know he has taken a keen interest in George III because he's told me that himself. George III, much misunderstood monarch. Most people remember him largely because of a film, actually. They think of him as the king who went mad and the king who lost America. He was also the king who did all sorts of other things, which was to patch things up with America soon afterwards and create what has obviously since then become a great alliance. He's the king who, under his watch, places like India, Australia, New Zealand, they all came under the crown, for better or worse. He was the most cultured monarch of his time. I would say that King Charles III is probably the most musical monarch since King George III. They both play musical instruments. They both love their music. Look at King Charles. He commissioned 12 new pieces of music for his coronation. George III, great lover of Handel. They were both architects. They both liked to design buildings. They were both fascinated by farming. They both were great patrons of the arts generally. George III was actually had a first edition folio of Shakespeare's works. It's in the Royal Library and it's got his notes in it. And King Charles now, as we know, as Prince Charles, was a great lover of Shakespeare, the Royal Shakespeare Company. I think that would probably be the monarch he would most like to sit down and have a chat with. As for what great royal mystery would he like to know the answer to? I suspect, like a lot of members of the royal family, he'd love to know what happened to the crown jewels. At the time of the Civil War, Cromwell flogged them off, some got melted down, but a lot didn't. They ended up in private hands, and they're probably some of them remain to this day. One or two of the crown jewels did survive the Civil War, things like the anointing spoon, Elizabeth I's pearls, the Black Prince's ruby, Edward the Confessor's sapphire, but most of them didn't. So most of the crown jewels we see now, the ones you see in the Tower of London, they had to be made from scratch at the time of the Restoration by Charles II. I think Charles III would love to know what happened to the original set. So, KTB, how many languages can King Charles speak and which ones? Well, as a King of Canada, as he is very proudly, if you're going to be King of Canada, you've got to speak French, because there are 7 million, I think 7 million at least, Canadian subjects who speak French, first language. He also speaks German. I've heard him address the German Parliament in German, faultlessly, very impressively. So said all the Germans. I don't speak German, but everyone there who did was impressed. He speaks spatterings of other things. Obviously, he speaks a bit of Welsh, having been Prince of Wales. He studied Welsh for a term University College Wales in Aberystwyth ahead of his investiture in 1969, so he could speak Welsh. He's the first king, as far as I know, first British king who can write his name in Arabic. He's had classes in Arabic because of his connection to various Islamic organisations, not least to the Oxford School of Islamic Architecture, which he's patron. And as we heard this week, during or we've heard lately this month, during his visit to Northern Ireland, he can speak a bit of Irish too. So little bits here and there. He likes, when he's making a speech at a state banquet, you'll often hear him, he'll learn a few lines of whatever the language is. The first state visit of his reign was the incoming visit of Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, and he welcomed him with 5 or 6 different words of welcome in different African dialects. So he does like languages. He has a good ear for languages, but the main ones, as I said, French and German. Do you know, asked Katie B again. Katie B's asked a few questions, so Katie, thanks for these. Do you know any fun stories or can tell us more of King Charles's time in Geelong? Geelong is the Australian school where during his years, his secondary education at Gordonston in Scotland, he spent 2 terms away. He was delighted to get out of Gordonston. He didn't like Gordonston very much. Loved his time at Geelong in Australia, famous school in Australia. It was pretty, hard work. It was outward bound. Physically, it was probably more demanding than Gordonston. There were a lot of runs, hikes, camping out. He talked of blistering heat in the day and blisters. He had blisters pretty much from beginning to end. Cold nights out in the open. He often refers to the spiders and the ants and the snakes and all these things he encountered along the way, but he absolutely loved it. He found he was very welcome there. He said they rub, I think his phrase was they knocked off a few pommy corners off me, and a good thing too. And while he was there, they went on a big expedition to Papua New Guinea, which he found absolutely fascinating. So I think it instilled in him actually the lifelong love of Australia, and he still talks about that to this day. Funny stories. I mean, there was his first attempt at throwing a boomerang. I know that was a disaster. It did start to come back, and he fell over into a cowpat, but everybody fell about laughing, so no hard feelings there. Another one. We know King Charles loves to paint. Are any of his paintings displayed anywhere for the public to view? An exhibition for charity would be amazing. Well, they do go on exhibition from time to time. They are watercolours mainly. That's one of the key differences between King Charles and his father. Prince Philip was a very good artist too. They both had a shared love of the Norfolk-based artist Edward Seago, great admirers of his. But whereas Prince Philip liked to paint in oils, Prince Charles, now king, but when he started painting he was obviously prince, he preferred watercolours. And watercolours are delicate, so you can't have them on display all the time because they fade. But they do go on display periodically. They have been on display for charity. I think, for example, if you're lucky enough to get one of the tickets to go inside Balmoral this summer when it's open to the public, I bet you'll see, I've seen some of Prince's watercolours on the wall. He's still, as king, he still paints when he has time. Obviously he has much less time, but he's particularly keen when he's up in Scotland. He still likes to get out the easel, and they're very nice. They're very nice paintings. So say proper art critics. I mean, they're not just sort of sycophants going, "Oh, sir, that's nice." I mean, they're genuinely there is a talent there. Does King Charles, asked Joanne Kay, does King Charles have a favourite cocktail or spirit? Yes, a martini. I'm told they're very strong. I've never had one, but someone who has said, you just want the one, that'll do. Actually described it to me as weapons grade. And obviously he's abstemious. He doesn't drink much, but yes, if he's going to have something, it'll be a martini. Sir Welch here asks, which instrument does he play presently? Is it still the cello? Well, he did learn the cello as a young man. He's very fond of the cello. He doesn't play, I haven't heard him play. Maybe he secretly gets the cello out in private. He's got a lot on his plate, but he loves his music. He, for example, when I was writing my book, I interviewed Andrew Lloyd Webber, who said that the King's knowledge of English choral music is second to nobody's. He said he's a proper expert. So I think I'd say he's more of a connoisseur than a practitioner these days. Does King Charles still find time to garden? It would be terrific if he could slip out from duty and potter around, says Angela. Yeah, he loves gardening. He is constantly gardening. I think one of the things he's enjoyed since becoming king is doing the garden up all around the various royal estates. There's new gardens going in at Sandringham, at Balmoral, at Windsor. He takes a very keen interest in it. I've seen him out gardening at Highgrove. He started to garden as a child. He said he told me that it was something he'd sort of picked up. He wondered if it was sort of hereditary. He said one of the great gardeners in the family was his great grandmother, the Countess of Strathmore. She loved gardening, and in turn, the late Queen Mother. He loved going to look at her garden at Royal Lodge. When he was a little boy, he and Princess Anne were both given little plots at Buckingham Palace where they were encouraged to grow things. He remembers growing his first tomato. And then when he bought Highgrove as a young man, that's when he really, he could let his sort of gardening instincts run riot. And it is an amazing garden. It's well worth looking around. It's all there. It's all in aid of the King's Foundation. And it has everything from very ordered sections. It's got a national collection, I think, of hostas and birches. It's got a wonderful wildflower meadow. And it's got a rather sort of fairy tale place called the Stumpery, full of it's a sort of Victorian design, lots of sort of upended old logs and things. And he said to me, he said sometimes he gardens from his dreams, which is interesting, particularly to those of us like me who aren't very good gardeners. His idea of gardening is a bit of plastic lawn and a barbecue. But no, he loves his gardens. Manya has asked, has King Charles converted to Islam? Simple question. Simple answer, no. Finally, a number of questions asking about the Duke of York. Why does the King not evict his brother from Royal Lodge? Again, as I've gone into some detail in my book, the fact is that Prince Andrew has a lease on Royal Lodge. It's the Queen Mother, the late Queen Mother's house on the edges of the estate at Windsor. It's where the late Queen grew up as a little girl. It's a much-loved house, but the Duke of York has a lease, and for now, as long as he can pay the significant costs very significant, we're talking millions for maintenance and security, then that's going to continue. The worry is, where's that money going to come from, given that he doesn't have any obvious sources of income. So when the moment comes, if the moment comes where he can't foot the bill for security, because it's outside the Windsor estate, so it has its own security arrangements, then the lease would have to be called in. But for now, we'll wait and see. But he was offered the vacancy of Frogmore Cottage, which was, of course, the home of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex until they left the UK. The Duke was offered that. He said no, he was going to stay at Royal Lodge. It's a very large house. It's just got him in it. Occasionally his ex-wife, Sarah Duchess of York, is there too. But for now, that's where he wants to be. And again, you know, the King could put his foot down. He could sort of, I dare say, invoke some ancient law, but he's got plenty of other things to worry about. But as soon as the security or the maintenance falls into abeyance, well, then I think he will be out. So if you've got any other questions on the King or any other aspects of the monarchy, please stick them in the comments section below. And I'm sure in the future I'll come back and answer some of them. In the meantime, if you'd like to know more about the King, my biography of him, Charles III, New King, New Court, The Inside Story, that's out now. It's in the bookshops. And for all royal news, royal videos, all the latest, you know where to find it. It's on the Daily Mail Royals YouTube channel. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Richard Kay. I'm the editor-at-large at the Daily Mail. But I'm also a long-time royal writer for the newspaper and have been covering the royals since the, 1980s. And today I'm very happy to be here to answer some of your questions, our readers and viewers of Palace Confidential, about the late Princess Diana. I became friends with Diana during the course of my time as the royal correspondent of the paper, and we became very good friends in the last 5 or 6 years of her life. So it's a great pleasure for me to address some of your many questions about this remarkable woman. If I may, I'm going to have to put on my glasses. My eyesight is not as good as it once was. So first up, we're hearing from Gry Elberg, if I've got that right. He asks, can I describe the Diana I knew? Well, the Diana I knew was amusing, not at all as she came across often in public. And what I mean by that is she had a very wry sense of humour. She knew about current affairs, what was going on in the world, and she was someone who had a great deal of interest in what was happening all about her and all around her. For someone who was so often at the centre of the headlines, as she was throughout really her time as a royal princess, she was remarkably uninterested about herself and much more in other things and other people. Having said that, you go on to ask whether she was as paranoid as the press say she was. I never thought Diana was paranoid at all, but you've got to remember, she lived her life in a constant glow of publicity. It wasn't always kind to her. She found it very difficult. She made certain choices in her life which almost invited the kind of scrutiny that she was under. She gave up, for example, it was her decision to give up her police protection, so it meant that wherever she went, the paparazzi really had unhindered access to her, and some of them were absolutely brutal towards her. They wanted to try and provoke her into a reaction, and often that meant tears, and she would often fall into their trap. I mean, having said that, I think it's only fair to say that she understood the power of the media and what she could offer, and she knew that a certain look she gave to the cameras would dominate the newspaper coverage and might explain something that was going on in her life. I mean, she was quite canny in that regard, if you get what I mean. You further ask if I think she was too smart for Charles. No, I don't think she was too smart for Charles. I think there was a brief period in the 1980s where she was very much his yin to her yang, and they were an exceptionally good team. I mean, the fact is, for many years, the world and indeed the media reporting on them didn't know how grim the marriage was because they were so professional in public. Finally, you want to know, if she had lived, do I think whether Charles would have married Camilla? Well, I think that's one of the $64,000 questions. I think the short answer, if she just lived, is that there would have been no marriage between Charles and Camilla. However, had Diana gone on to marry, whether it be Dodi Fayed or someone else, then I think that would have cleared the obstacles that would have prevented Charles marrying Camilla. But had she remained unmarried, I think it would have been extremely difficult for him to marry. Larky asks, how did she get together with Dodi, whether she was happy with him or was it more, as he puts it, to be provocative against the royals? Well, we know how she got together with Dodi. Dodi's father, Mohammed Al Fayed, the owner of Harrods at that time, invited, I would say instructed his son to come and join the family holiday that he was hosting at his compound in the south of France. Diana had gone there in July 1997 with William and Harry. People seem to may have forgotten that she was someone who suddenly found herself rather exposed after her divorce from Charles, having to make arrangements for holidays which were inevitably had to be very secure for William and Harry. It presented a whole set of new difficulties for her. Fayed's offer of a holiday at his place with all the private security he had solved many of those problems. Whether she was right to take that holiday is another point. She and I disagreed very much on that. I thought he was using her, and I thought at the time that he was a bad figure. When I say a bad figure, he was a very controversial figure. He'd almost single-handedly brought down the then Conservative government in Britain by bribing members of Parliament. So no, I didn't think it was a good idea to go on holiday with him, but I understood why she did. Anyway, it was on that holiday that she met Dodi, and don't forget, Dodi had originally arrived in the south of France with a fiancée who he surreptitiously shielded from Diana by keeping her offshore, so to speak, on a separate boat from the one where his father was entertaining the princess. All very a lot of skullduggery involved, I suspect, in how this romance going. But nevertheless, it was a real romance, and I say that because it was the first time that Diana had sort of openly permitted, if you like, photographs, albeit long-distance ones, of her and a man to be taken. And there was a huge worldwide story and a huge interest in who this man was who'd captured the princess's heart. Whether he had or not, I wasn't entirely sure, but he certainly was the man for the moment, and she was using it. Larky also asked if she was doing it to get at the royals, and I think there almost certainly was an element of that, because she knew that Fayed Senior was a very controversial figure, and it would also almost certainly be seen as a provocative move on her part. Catherine Brown, she asks, she remembers her being very sporty, and she wants to know what her exercise routine was like and what did she like or like not to eat. Well, Diana was very sporty. She had a series of brilliant personal trainers who completely transformed her physical shape. I mean, she got quite muscular at one stage, but it improved her sort of general frame, if you like. That habit that she had as a young woman of being slightly stooped all went away. So her routine was 3 times a week. She had her physical education, her physical trainer come to Kensington Palace. They did routines inside the palace. Very rarely did she venture outside because, you know why, because of the presence of the paparazzi. And she also had her daily swim at the Buckingham Palace indoor pool. That was a huge part of her routine. On food, well, frankly, Diana didn't eat very much, but she had a decent appetite. I had lunch with her on many occasions, and the chef would bring up some delightful food, usually some kind of poached fish or grilled chicken with salads. Nothing too creamy, but she did like a pudding. She didn't drink. She barely had anything to drink in all the time I knew her. She would occasionally sip at some champagne, but she always served some fabulous wine. I was allowed to tuck into the Kensington Palace wine cellar. But that's how she pretty much kept on top of things. Who were her close friends, Catherine also asked, and what did they like to do in their leisure times? Well, Diana's life changed a lot, certainly in those last years after her separation from Charles. She shed a lot of her sort of royal friends. Sadly, in my view, I think that was a great mistake. And she only had a very tight-knit group of close friends by the end of her life. What did they do? Well, I suppose I would consider myself one of them. We went to the cinema. We went out to dinner. We went to see some friends in their houses. She loved going to the coast for drives. I'd sometimes drive down to the south coast, and on occasions up to Norfolk, where she had lived as a little girl. And I remember one winter's day we drove up to the North Norfolk coast, and we were determined to try and find her, the Spencer family's old changing hut on Brancaster Beach, those British institutions. Anyway, it was so covered in sand, and there's been so much erosion of the beach up there, it was very hard to find it. And we think we found it, and we stood on the roof of it. And I think she may even have taken a picture of me standing on it. Anyway, she liked seeing friends. She had a handful, as I say, of close friends, but she trusted few people. She felt she'd been so let down. Moving on, Swan Girl asks, did she really fall apart on the Australia tour with Charles? Well, she went to Australia on 3 occasions that I know officially with Charles, so I'm not entirely sure which one you mean, but the first one is probably the most famous. I didn't cover that trip. That was in 1983. She was still very young and famous. It was famous for the fact that they took the young Prince William with them, who was 9 months old. And it was also the birth of what became known as Di Mania. That's what the tabloids called it. And it was something to witness because huge crowds turned out. It wasn't just British people who were obsessed with the young princess, so too were people right around the world. And it was especially true in Australia. Lots of young women lined her route, and it was the beginning of what became known as I say, Di Mania. And for Charles, it was an entirely new experience because although he was very proud that his young wife was getting all this attention, this was a man who had sort of been born into the limelight, if you like, and suddenly he was not just having to share it, he was losing it. And I think it was an early sign of the tensions that were to come. Nee asks, was Diana religious? I know that royal family members are Church of England, but wondered if it was a priority to her and whether it was a comfort to her in tough times. Princess Diana was not particularly religious, but she took an interest in it. I don't think she was an active Anglican. She was obviously born into the Church of England, but the church she went to on occasions was very close to where I'm talking to you today from, in Kensington. It's a Catholic church on Kensington High Street, and she would occasionally go in there, pray, light a candle, and sit there in private contemplation. So often were her visits to this church and to other, and in fact her friendship with a number of Catholic figures, that people began wondering in the early 1990s whether she might, like her mother, convert to Catholicism, but she always assured me that that was not something she wanted to do. Katie B asks, what did Princess Diana want to be before she met the now King Charles? I think the short answer to that is a wife. She kind of thought from a young age that she was destined for a special role. She talked about that much later in those long series of interviews that were passed on to Andrew Morton, who wrote the devastating book about her marriage. She felt that someone was preparing a path for her, and the assumption was that it was to make a royal marriage. Had she not married Charles, I would have expected her to have married an aristocrat, the younger son of an earl perhaps, a landowner. I mean, I don't think she would have had a career as a businesswoman, or any kind of career actually. She wasn't academically clever, strategically very clever, but I don't think she didn't go to university, and I think her life would have been that as a mother and possibly the wife of a landowner. Peggy asks, the press seemed to have no mercy when chasing Diana around. Why didn't the royal family do more to protect her? And points out that she hasn't seen Catherine, the new Princess of Wales, having to run through the streets to get away from the cameras. What changed? The press were pretty merciless to Diana, but as I said earlier, only really after she made these rather controversial at the time changes to her life, standing down her police protection, she became much more of a target. I often used to question why she was prepared to put herself through all this, and didn't it make her much more vulnerable to potential attack and any other kind of physical assault that might have come her way. She took the view that her fame was her sort of guarantor of her safety, which was in a way slightly naive, but also quite remarkably astute, because it was absolutely true. When I was out with her and people saw her, and she was instantly recognisable, she had this very disarming way of sort of dealing with people who came up to her by saying, no, I'm not her, but people keep telling me I look like her, and how remarkable. But yeah, there is a contrast clearly with what happened to Diana when she was being cornered by the paparazzi with Catherine. But then Catherine was protected by the royal family and through her marriage to Prince William, as indeed Diana was to start with. But as I say, she made the changes that led to all those unseemly pictures of pursuit that came out. Fuzzy Poppet asks that she's read Catherine will soon be able to grant royal warrants. Why was Diana not given this opportunity? Well, we don't yet know whether Catherine will have an independent raft of royal warrants as others have in the past. Diana didn't, but she had them through Charles. She could have appointed people to receive the royal warrant simply by asking her husband to organise it. She didn't have an independent, you're absolutely right, she didn't have her independent power to do it, and at the moment neither does Catherine, but maybe that will change, and maybe that's a good thing. We're sort of allowing the wife to have some control over this sort of thing as well. Genevieve Chua, I hope I've got that right, asks, was there ever a moment in Diana's life that you witnessed firsthand which completely changed the way you saw her, something the world never fully understood. I've often thought about that, Genevieve, and there was one moment I remember when she contacted me one day from Kensington Palace. As I mentioned, my office here at the Daily Mail is very, very close to the palace. It was one of the reasons why we were able to see each other quite often and quite quickly. And she got very excited about a convoy of cars that were going very close to Kensington Palace, passing by up beside the palace, and she wondered whose convoy it was, and I very quickly established it was the Sultan of Brunei. And she said, oh, how exciting. And we went and stood and watched this cavalcade as it went back again. And I made the point that nobody was interested and nobody was taking any notice. And she said, well, what are you saying? I said, well, if it had been you, Kensington would have come to a halt, and wherever the cars were going, thousands of people would have turned out to see you. But for the Sultan of Brunei, no, nobody really cared. And I thought the fact that she didn't quite get that, she looked at me askance and said, are you sure? I said, no, I'm certain. And it was as though she didn't really understand the power of her fame. Katie B asked, did Diana have a favourite country from royal tours, or a country she found the most fascinating? Well, she absolutely did have a favourite country, and it will come as no surprise to all our American viewers that it was the United States. She loved the US. I think that if she could, she would have moved there and lived there. She talked about it right at the very end of her life to me, about settling for a time in the US. What held her back? Well, obviously, access to William and Harry. She couldn't just abandon them. They were young boys, and I don't think she had quite worked out how she could live in New York or California, for example, and maintain that close contact that she needed to have with William and Harry. But you know, as they got older, that might have changed, and I could see her living there. I often asked her what it was about America that attracted her to the country, and she said it was a sort of this idea that she had, that she felt that she'd be freer somehow, that they took a much more nuanced attitude towards celebrity, and she based that assumption on the fact that Hollywood, and there were so many Hollywood stars who lived their lives pretty much unhindered, and she thought that she would just be one among many. When I pointed out that she would be the number one among many, she didn't agree. But that has always been my view, and in fact I think that's really what Prince Harry has found, that there was huge interest in him when he moved to California, quite above all those home-based American celebrity and Hollywood stars. And I think that would have plagued Diana just as much as it had plagued her really living in the United Kingdom. Pixie asks, was the coy look all a big act? The coy look, I'm assuming, Pixie, you mean that habit she had of sort of looking down and then looking up through her hair. That was a defence mechanism, quite frankly. No, she wasn't a shy woman. She was actually remarkably confident. She could stride into a room and pretty much make eye contact with anyone and deal with whatever was coming her way. But I think in the early days of her marriage, and when she was feeling under pressure, she did resort to dipping her head. At times she was biting her lip to try and stop the tears from falling. There was always some crisis, or so it seemed to me, going on in her life in the background. But no, I don't think it was a deliberate ploy, but it was a necessary defence mechanism. Deborah Hubble asks, do you think she would have worked with Kevin Costner on a project or more? Kevin Costner, the movie star, contacted her in late 96, early 97 to see if she would be interested in a remake of The Bodyguard. He had this dream of doing The Bodyguard Part 2 with Princess Diana, no less, in the Whitney Houston role. I mean, Diana was absolutely tickled pink by that. She thought Costner was a very dishy actor, but no, she had no plans to make a film with him. What Dizfan asks, was Diana always pro-monarchy? And I think this is a very important question, because a lot of people have criticised Diana, particularly in the years since her death, that she was out to destroy the House of Windsor, undermined it at every opportunity. That is palpably untrue. She was very pro-monarchy. Why? because her son was its future. And, you know, she taught William that the Windsor side of his life was just as valid as her Spencer side, and she, I think, will ensure that King William, when he comes to the throne, will be a very well-balanced and well-rounded monarch. Bo asks, how much actual parenting did Diana do and how much did the nanny do? Also, after the divorce, with whom did the boys live? Well, Diana was very much a hands-on parent, but she was also a young woman of her time and of her class. And at that time, in the 1980s, when the children were born, there was wraparound staff at Kensington Palace. There were butlers and valets, cooks, chauffeurs, and yes, nannies. But Diana had some very strict rules. She took the boys whenever she could to their London schools, as long as they fitted in with her engagements. Don't forget, she was often travelling up and down the country, sometimes abroad, so she couldn't do it all the time. But whenever she could, she would take the boys to school and collect them. She organised parties for their friends at Kensington Palace. She took them, the boys and lots of their friends, on away days. I remember their excursions to Disney World, for example, in Florida, and also go-karting and theme parks all over the United Kingdom. Who did the boys live with after the divorce? Well, the boys carried on living with their mother and their father. There had been a very strict division of time ever since the separation, really. Diana very magnanimously, in my view, allowed Charles always to have William and Harry at those important royal holiday events, Christmas, Easter. They were always with the Queen and the rest of the royal family at Windsor and at Sandringham. And Diana was prepared to allow that to happen. But otherwise, they divided their times between the nursery at Kensington Palace and their bedrooms at Highgrove House. Now then, Evelyn McGovern asks, where is Diana's sapphire and pearl choker? That is a stunning piece of jewellery which Diana had adapted from a brooch given to her as a wedding present by Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, which she sometimes actually did continue to wear as a brooch, but more often as a choker with, I think, was 7 strands of pearls. It is in the jewellery collection of William and Harry somewhere. When on Diana's death, all her personal jewellery was handed over to William and Harry, and they divided it up. It included her engagement ring, her wedding ring. There were obviously royal pieces in that collection which reverted to the Queen, and they have been seen around, I think, around the neck of Kate, and indeed, I think on one occasion on Camilla too. But as for the sapphire and pearl choker, that has never been seen since the princess's death, and as far as I know, it's held in the collection of jewellery that William and Harry, I guess, somehow hold jointly between them. Leo asks, since Diana's death, has the king, i.e. Charles, spoken much about her? And if so, what has he said? And has he said anything since he ascended the throne? The short answer to that is he hasn't said much, but he has said a little. In the immediate weeks and months after her death, he made a point of doing 2 things. One, reassuring William and Harry following the death of their mother that her presence would always still be felt. He flooded Highgrove House with photograph frames of his wife. However difficult that must have been for Charles himself, he did acknowledge that Diana had been a brilliant mother. And he did speak about her. He took on one of her interests in AIDS. I remember him going to an AIDS event where he spoke movingly about the contribution that his wife had made to battling AIDS. And he did a number of engagements over the succeeding years which were directly associated with Princess Diana, but not so much since then. And precious little, really, I think, since he became king. I can't recall him saying anything in recent times about the influence of the princess. However, he has seen both William and Harry speak out about their mother, particularly so on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of her death, when they both contributed to documentaries and spoke very movingly about how important Diana was in their lives. Amanda Scriwer, if I got that right, asks, how did Diana handle friction and fights between William and Harry while they were growing up? Well, she handled them pretty much like any mum did. She said enough of that, occasionally gave them a cuff and a gentle slap, but she was quite sharp with them. She would stop them squabbling. They often fought when they were in the back of the car with her. And they were well-behaved boys, and if their mother lost their temper with them, then they knew they were in big trouble and they would shut up. Gwyn Sobrel asks, how do you think William will continue to protect Diana's legacy, especially when he ascends to the throne? He once said as a young teen that he would restore her HRH when he was king. Is that even possible? Good couple of questions here, Gwyn. I think William is very conscious of bringing Diana with him on his journey from heir in line to heir and then eventually to monarch. We've seen him speak about her, as I say, not just on occasions to mark the anniversaries that have passed on her death, but also when he got engaged, he talked about how he wanted his mother to be part of his and Kate's journey. Princess Charlotte has Diana among her names. She was also christened at the church where his mother was christened at Sandringham. So I think there are subtle signs that William will always keep his mother close. But there's a very crucial question here you ask about that HRH status. On divorce, Diana lost her HRH. A lot was made of it at the time. It was described as a rather cruel act on behalf of the royal family. Although Diana had volunteered to lose it, she did come to regret it. She confided in me on several occasions that she wished she had managed to keep it. I understood why it happened, but I also felt there was a very strong case as a mother of a future king why it should have been kept for her. And yes, it was reported, I reported it actually, because Diana told me that William had said, don't worry, mummy, I'll give you your HRH back. Yes, he could do that. He could make sure that when the princess is referred to at landmark events, her HRH is restored. It is something he could do. It would be very simple. Will he do it or not? I really don't know. He hasn't given any indication as a young man that it's in his thinking, but it wouldn't at all surprise me if he did. Debster asks, coming straight to the point and bringing us bang up to date, about how long after meeting Meghan Markle would she, Diana, have sent her packing. Debster says, I think 5 minutes tops. Well, I hate to disagree with you, Debster, and none of us really know, but I think there is something about Meghan that Diana would have found not just intriguing, but slightly liberating. I think she would have admired Harry's decision to settle in America. She wouldn't have admired, however, the rift with William. But I think she would have liked Meghan's independence and the fact that she was able to offer Harry an escape route, if you like, from royal duty. So I think I don't think she would have given a short shrift. I think she would have been very disappointed by how things panned out. But I think initially she would have been very welcoming to her. That's my view. I hope you've enjoyed all that. We try to get through as much as we can. If you've got any more questions, send them in. As you can see at the bottom of the screen, you know how to do that by now. For more great royal videos, please subscribe to the Daily Mail Royals YouTube channel.